Fiona was sick again. Her maids and fiancé Louis could anticipate she would have another episode, but this time, to their surprise, Fiona walked away confidently. The moment her head hit, her memories started spinning violently. Fiona used to be an office worker. Underpaid and overworked, she spent most of her days in the office. Her co-workers were useless, leaving a harsh workload to her. And her life ended moments after she went home for the first time in ages, chugging beer until she blacked out. But the question of what happened after was unanswered. She rose from her bed, finding herself in the same otome game she used to play before she started working, amidst the glitter as one of the evil noblewomen. Just as she thought, she had been reborn as Fiona Elior. She looked in the mirror to see a girl with light hair and eyes. This Fiona was the daughter of a very, very wealthy marquise, and she had an excellent relationship with her parents and brother. Fiona held her hands up in victory. In this life she would live in nothing other than peace and luxury. In the game, the evil noblewoman Fiona appeared in the route where the heroine tries to win the heart of Fiona's fiancé. And Fiona obstructs the heroine, looks down on her and even tries to kill her. In the end, all of her crimes were exposed and she dies in prison. Fiona was certain that would not be a problem because she had never played the role of the evil noblewoman yet. She had not even met the heroine, let alone bullied her. And as for her fiancé, she had no attachment to him at all. Not to mention, she did not have the best impression of him anyway. So even if the heroine tried to win his heart, she would never get in her way. Rather, she would gladly welcome the annulment of the engagement. That way she could keep living in this house, enjoying a luxurious and peaceful life forever. But suddenly, Fiona felt a strange sensation. Just a bit of dancing and movement made her heart pound, and she had no strength. It was like Fiona was really unfit. There was a knock at the door, and Fiona was met with Annie, who asked her if she was really awake. Annie was Fiona's personal maid, and because she took her from the orphanage, she served Fiona with loyalty and love. She looked Fiona up and down, telling her she had been asleep for 3 days, so she should not push herself too hard. Fiona gasped. Sleeping? For 3 whole days. Annie told Fiona if she died, she would die with her. Of course, her loyalty did not need to be questioned, but everything she said confirmed that Fiona's body was certainly weak. How did she even move around before with this body? When she thought about it, Fiona was always wound up. She would consistently get angry and was hard to deal with. But in her previous life she was forced to go to work no matter how bad her health was, so she understood. The injustice of even the sound of people talking became a cause of headaches, and that dark trapped feeling with no way out. It was the cruelty of trying to live normally while physically unwell. Even the argument she had with her fiancé 3 days ago was because he said she walked too slowly. And that was because of her ill health. The only thing she could do was take her anger out on him. So it was clear why Fiona was the way she was in the game. But if that is the case, can she, with such a fragile body, calmly deal with a fiancé she argues with every time they meet? Or even with the heroine? It was true that she would obstruct the heroine or threaten her life. But Fiona's features already looked sharp, and if she was careless and ended up looking like she was scorning her, the heroine might misunderstand her. As for her fiancé, that alone might be enough reason for him to punish her. Annie asked Fiona what she was going to do. Her body was still tired, so she offered to bring her meal to her. But Fiona said no and that she wanted to go to the dining hall instead. She knew that there was no use in complaining. In any case, she had to move her muscles and internal organs a little to become more active so that she could live peacefully in this life and make up for what she missed in the last one. She knew that the first thing she needed to do was make healthier choices. When Fiona arrived in the dining room, she was met with the surprised faces of her family. They asked her if she was really well enough to walk around and told her she could have eaten in her room instead. They even offered to bring her a plate up. But Fiona was stunned to see the spread of food. Her father told her she needed to eat up if she wanted to become strong again. In her previous life, when she was in perfect health, she would have been overjoyed to see such fine meat, even drooling over it. But with this current body, even the smell of it made things difficult. So Fiona told her father she would like to eat something a bit lighter. But her father told her it may be best for her to eat something more nourishing. Her mother also added that although it may be hard, she should bear with it and eat. Fiona could not understand why her family, who were usually so kind and spoiled her, could force such torture on her. From the start, their meals had been beef-based. But whenever her health declined, it seemed the meals became even richer. Is it possible that everyone genuinely believed this would restore her strength? Fiona wondered if people in this world did not know how to treat the sick. She knew she needed to find a solution for this. Otherwise, she would die before she became the evil noblewoman. So she flat out told her parents that she could not eat the dish. Her parents and brother looked at her in shock. But then Fiona explained to them that although steak was nutrient-dense, it was also full of fat and difficult to digest. And for someone with a frail body and weakened digestive system, it would be a burden to eat. Therefore, even if she ate food like this, she would never regain her health. But then her father told her she always ate steak. Fiona did not eat all of it though, she could only manage a few bites. Her father admitted that was true, and Fiona knew explaining things may be the best approach. She continued to say that there were many nutrients in this world, and for a person's health, the type of food should change depending on their condition at the time. That was why they should improve her diet. She knew if there was no awareness about nutrition, then she should pave the way herself. So Fiona burst into the kitchen, and the chefs were stunned to see her. She could see that there were more than enough ingredients and she recognized most of them. She told the chefs that she was going to prepare food that took health into consideration. She tied her hair up and rolled up her sleeves. Fiona began with a cabbage and an onion. It was enough for now, but the servants were still perplexed as to why Fiona was there. They bowed, asking if they had done something to offend her. Fiona did not want them to be afraid of her, but she understood, considering how Fiona had acted toward them before today. So she told them there was no need to worry. She did not come there to shout at them or fire them so they could raise their heads and rest assured. She even told them that she was grateful for their delicious meals, and they thanked her. But to Fiona, it seemed like her reputation was far worse than she had thought. Fiona held her hand out and told them there was just one thing she would like to ask. Since her body was weak, she would like them to change the menu from now on to lighter dishes that would suit her health. For example, low-fat dishes or ones that did not have much beef. The servants were shocked to hear this, telling her it may not be appropriate since food without beef was practically commoner food. They did not think such meals would be fit for a noble's daughter. Fiona wondered in this world if there really was a difference between what commoners and nobles ate. She told them she understood, but she did not know on what basis everyone decided that light food belonged to commoners. For the kinds of food people could eat to be limited by class, she thought that was truly inappropriate. Of course, there were expensive ingredients commoners could not buy, but she had said this to her parents before. The basis for maintaining health was not to cling to one single ingredient but to choose what suited your body's condition at the time. For example, this cabbage contained the digestive enzyme amylase, which helps prevent bloating and heartburn. Its leaves were rich in vitamin C, iron, calcium, and beta-carotene. Also the onion. The servants asked if there really could be such a big difference between foods. And then Fiona wondered if the people of this world really knew nothing about nutrients or the benefits of food. Now that she thought about it, she realized that her family's past reactions and the contents of the menus now made sense. For the people of this world who knew nothing about nutrients, the only standards for good food were price and rarity. That was why the nobles ate beef all of the time and insisted on having it. It was truly hell for someone weak-bodied. The servants then asked Fiona why she had such knowledge. No one here knew such things. Of course, Fiona could not tell them the real reason. That was because nutritional science in her previous life was advanced, and on top of that she worked at a black company, so she cared about her health more than anyone else to avoid getting sick. She would make her own hearty meals. So Fiona blurted out that she had read a book and the chefs demanded to know which book it was. Fiona thought to herself that this world seemed harsher than she had thought and all this was making her head start to hurt. They could at least believe her. At least Fiona had solved a mystery that always puzzled her about this world's food culture, and it seemed the cooks had now become interested in the nutritional value of ingredients. So it was fine for now. The chefs argued about the taste and whether it would be good or not. Fiona smiled to herself. If they had never cooked such dishes before because they thought of them as simple food, it was natural they would be worried. She knew what she needed to do was make sure they were fully convinced. She told the chefs she would show them in practice. So she placed the onion on the chopping board and separated the cabbage leaves from the stem. As she went, she told them that cabbage was rich in fiber, so they needed to peel it a bit thicker. Then they needed to slice the onion thinly and cut the cabbage into small pieces. The servants' jaws were on the floor as they watched Fiona cook. She put butter in the pot and sautéed the onion, then added the cabbage. She then turned to ask them if they had broth. The servants gave her a pot that they kept aside for soup. Fiona smiled. In her previous life, she used some powder, but of course that might not be a thing here. She mashed the cabbage and onion together and added some milk. It was beginning to settle and looked really tasty. She finished by adding salt and pepper for taste. In Fiona's opinion, it turned out great. She called it Fiona's special cabbage potage. She sat down and tried the soup, as did the servants. They were thoroughly impressed. It was true that the fatty flavor was not there, but that was what made the cabbage's sweetness stand out even more. This was completely different from the simple food they knew. Fiona understood now that if food was prepared this way, it would be possible to eat with an appetite even when in poor health. She was happy that everyone accepted the soup and she asked them what they thought. The chefs looked at each other and eventually apologized to Fiona. They bowed, taking the blame for her illness and suffering. Fiona told them there was nothing they could have done differently as they did not know much about food and nutrition, but the chefs told her that they had been influenced and bound by ideas that were outdated and ignorant. From now on, they wanted to prepare dishes that did not burden the body just as Fiona had taught them. They asked her if she did not mind, of course, if she could teach them more about her extensive knowledge of various foods. Fiona smiled, telling them yes. She had not been able to eat proper meals before, which was why her body became so thin, but she was now confident that from now on she would be able to gradually gain weight. She was relieved that this food problem was resolved for now. She told the chefs that if she could be a little greedy, it would be wonderful if she could also make Japanese food. The chefs asked if she was talking about miso. One of them told her he had read about it in a book, a healthy soup made from fermented soybeans and a seasoning called miso from a distant land. Fiona bounced toward the man, asking if that was true. The man began to sweat, saying yes, but he had never seen it before. Fiona asked the man to bring it, but she wondered how it was possible for them to have miso. She could not see any ingredients for Japanese food when she looked around. But then the man said they unfortunately could not get it, because it was extremely rare and only sold on the market occasionally, almost like a legendary item. Fiona sighed in disappointment. She was already mentally prepared to eat miso soup. She asked the man if it existed, and he said yes, so she said that in that case maybe it was enough simply knowing it was a thing in this world. No matter how rare it was, if they checked the market every day, one day they might get lucky and find it. Miso, soy sauce, and if miso existed then maybe she could find wasabi and mirin too. So there was no time for her to dwell and be miserable. For the sake of her health she would find the Japanese seasonings no matter the cost. Later that day there was a knock on Lewis's door. His attendant delivered the news that his fiancée Lady Fiona had woken up today. Lewis looked out of the window wondering what he should do now. Louis Hanton was the eldest son of a duke's family, one of the captive targets in the game. He was a wonderful character, very kind-natured and always smiling, but that only applied to the heroine or people he cared about. As for Fiona, the villainous noblewoman, from now on she had to avoid angering him so she would not end up condemned, and spend her time peacefully until the day the engagement was annulled. But the problem came faster than she expected. Only 1 week after starting to improve her diet, she was invited to a weekend party. Annie delivered the news while Fiona was basking in the sunlight to produce vitamin D in her skin. Vitamin D was an essential nutrient for maintaining immunity. Annie told her that it seemed this was a party at the Duke of Porphyry's estate, and his lordship, the Marquis, had already sent back an acceptance to attend a month ago. Fiona knew what that meant. It was the home of Camilla Porphyry, the other villainous noblewoman in the game. Camilla was the top candidate to become the crown prince's fiancé, and the Porphyry family was one of the most powerful ducal families in the country, ranking first or second in influence. But her body still could not handle walking or talking for long periods, and although her ability to eat had improved, not much else had yet. Fiona's past behavior at parties had always earned her nothing more than dislike. An unapproachable face meant she was not the most popular, but she knew that in order to avoid condemnation she needed to make an effort. But how could she show up with her current body? Annie told her it would be difficult to opt out now, as they had also received a confirmation letter from Lord Lewis to ensure her attendance. Fiona knew she had no choice now. On top of that, the letter said he would come to pick her up too, so there was no escape. Fiona would have preferred to meet Louis and go to the party after her strength was back. But reality was not that simple. With 5 days until the party, Fiona knew she needed to make a plan to face this challenge and take it head on. On the day of the party, Fiona looked amazing. With her long flowing hair, styled makeup on, and a stunning dress, the maids told her she looked beautiful. Getting dressed was exhausting, but Fiona chose everything wisely. A light dress that was not too tight and low heels. She forced a smile to make sure no one got the wrong idea. She prepared by walking a lot and stretching, and even so it might still be hard to stay long at the party. But Fiona knew that all she could do was give it her best. Her goal today was to get through the party quietly, even if she could not last until the end. She knew that this was the best plan to go ahead with. In no time Lord Lewis arrived. He looked dazzling too, wearing a fancy suit. Fiona smiled and he looked at her blankly before saying that she had actually decided to come today. Fiona awkwardly laughed. Could Lewis have some empathy, considering that the last time they met she collapsed? And was he not the one who sent the message practically forcing her to attend? All they needed to do was finish things smoothly and go home. Fiona told him to calm down, adding that she was looking forward to it. But this made Louis even more confused. He even asked her if she had eaten something spoiled. In the carriage, Fiona did her best to appear light and chirpy, but deep down she felt like she could never get along with Louis. They finally arrived at the mansion and Fiona stepped out, taking hold of Louis's hand. Fortunately, she still felt fine for now, so they walked in, and everyone turned to stare at them. A woman approached her, saying she was surprised she came. She asked if Fiona was planning to get bored and leave early. Fiona confidently walked off, knowing better than to waste her energy. She was proud that she got the bare minimum out of the way, greeting everyone and showing up. Even the refined ladies who tried to make snide remarks did not get a reaction from Fiona. She could say that this was a performance worthy of 100 out of 100. Now she could spend her time enjoying things within reason as much as she could and then quietly go home. Louis suggested they split up and act separately, leaving Fiona perplexed. He approached another man and smiled. That gentle smile he never showed to Fiona. She did not know what was happening. Separating was something they were used to, but it was not normal for engaged couples to be apart for the whole event. Even worse, people began to gossip, and Fiona overheard most of it on Louis' side. It was true that she was sick and tired, but the whole time she treated him rudely. Was that enough to make him hate her? To be left alone in this situation was quite hard to bear anyway, even if she was a different girl from who she used to be. Fiona walked away, but she began to feel really tired. She looked to the ground, catching the eye of a woman with dark hair who called her name. Fiona looked up to see the other villainess and the flower of high society. Her name was Camilla Porphyry. Camilla Porphyry was the villainess who appeared whenever the heroine got close to the crown prince, who was one of the love interests. Out of jealousy, she used her maids to bully the heroine, then pushed her down the stairs, which led to her being exiled from the country. Fiona knew she needed to have stronger resolve to get through the situation. Camilla told Fiona it was an honor that she came to the party. For some time now she had wanted to speak with Fiona. Fiona gulped, not sure what this could entail. Camilla said that she should reconsider her behavior. She reminded Fiona that leaving parties early was a breach of etiquette and that her sharp demeanor was unbecoming of a noblewoman. All of these were actions unworthy of a future duchess. The women behind Camilla did not hesitate to back her, saying that even Fiona simply being here was insolent. Fiona knew she was unpopular, but this was on another level. In truth, Lady Camilla had not said anything wrong. In fact, telling her directly might be better than whispering behind her back. Right now, maybe she needed tough love. Fiona looked at Camilla and her ladies and she thanked them for the kind advice given for her own good. She added that she had already begun to think that things could not go on like this. Her health was weak and both her body and mind had been in poor shape, and because of that it had caused Camilla and the others trouble. She apologized again, and even Louis turned to listen. Fiona vowed that from now on she would work harder to heal her body, and she would try to interact with them all properly. Camilla and the ladies looked at her in disbelief. Fiona continued to request that they could continue to guide and advise her. She had no choice but to earn their trust through her future actions. She bowed and the ladies looked at each other. They did not accept her words, asking her why they should believe something just because she said it. One of them commented that this was the first time she had heard that Fiona was in poor health. Fiona explained that she had not shared it because her foolish pride stopped her. Another woman argued that if she were truly weak, her fiancé Lord Louis would have been worried for her and stayed by her side. She asked if even Lord Louis did not believe her excuse. Fiona had not told Lord Louis about her health condition. To Louis she was just a selfish and bothersome fiancé, so of course he would not believe what she had to say. Fiona wondered what she should do. Right now she had no way to convince anyone except for one person. Louis approached Fiona, asking her what she was saying about him. Louis turned to face Camilla, who told him it was nothing. They were only giving advice to Fiona about her behavior. Louis looked at Fiona before dropping it. He told them he would speak to her himself, and that was enough for now. Camilla excused herself, saying she had nothing more to say. She added that if Fiona was truly weak, she should try not to overexert herself. She walked away, leaving Fiona stunned. Fiona was relieved that the interaction came to an end. She had initially worried things would escalate, but now she truly was at her limit. She also never expected Lord Louis to intervene. What made him suddenly do that? Could it be that he stepped in to help her? Or was it just because he did not want people gossiping about him? Louis called after her before she could leave. He asked her why she was alone. Fiona looked at him in utter surprise. Louis added that in situations like this, did she not have a friend or even acquaintances that she could rely on? He then remembered that since Fiona had not had any sort of social life until now, it was only natural she would not have anyone. Fiona had to bite her lip. Was it not normal for a fiancé to know his fiancé's social circle? Louis continued to say that he knew he arrived just in time, but as Camilla said, Fiona should try harder to build a better social life. Then Fiona began to sway. She knew this was not good. Her body was weak and her physical and mental strength could not keep up. Louis grabbed hold of her wrist, reminding her there was a limit to acting, but then Fiona suddenly collapsed. He caught her, staring at her limp body in shock. Fiona woke up in confusion. One moment she had been talking to Louis and the next she had blacked out. She could never forget how shocked Louis looked when she fell to the ground. She looked around and found that she was back home. When she checked the clock, she saw that she had not slept for too long, which was a good thing. Still, it was a huge blunder, and to faint right in front of her archenemy Louis of all people. Now he would have the perfect chance to put on a smug face and brag about the time he saved her. Fiona then heard someone enter. Speak of the devil. Louis walked in, surprised that she was awake. Fiona clutched the bedsheets as Louis seemed to scowl at her. She asked him why he was here. Louis asked Fiona if she thought he was the type of heartless man who would leave his fiancée passed out. He told her he was the one who brought her here. Fiona was still angry. This was the first time Louis had shown his face when she was unwell, so of course he was heartless. Louis told her that whether it was a sudden fainting spell from anemia or something else, that staged fall was on another level. He asked her if she was trying to get his attention again, reminding her that this would be the last time he went along with her antics. Fiona could not believe what he was saying. There was no way this man thought everything so far had been an act. She said that at the party she had clearly stated she had a weak constitution. Even if he did not believe her, this was too much. She told him she had never once tried to get his attention. Louis then asked why Fiona did these things. When they walked together, she deliberately slowed her pace, for example. Fiona told him she only slowed down because her health did not allow her to keep up with his speed. Louis then asked about when there was a step and Fiona pretended to stumble on purpose. Fiona defended herself, saying she truly stumbled because she was too weak to even lift her feet. He added that even when she spoke, she furrowed her brows and looked annoyed. But that was simply because Fiona was tired, so of course it showed on her face. Louis was perplexed. He asked about the times she left early and the social gatherings she skipped. All of that was also because she was sick, meaning she could not stand or walk around for long. Louis was speechless. It was as if he could not believe this was the truth behind Fiona's ill nature. He asked her again if all of this was true. He told Fiona she had never mentioned any of it before. Fiona replied that she had not told him the truth because she was worried he would use it as a reason to call off the engagement, and she did not want to lose him because he was a partner with excellent prospects. Louis stared at Fiona, lost for words. He finally asked her why she decided to tell him now. Fiona said it was because she realized that hiding her health condition was no longer possible, and that she no longer wished to cling to their engagement. Moreover, she could see that Louis did not care about her at all, and continuing the engagement while they were so estranged would not be healthy either. Louis looked down, as did Fiona. He asked her how she knew he did not care about her. Fiona told him it was simple, in the way he behaved. Of course, she was not in a position to talk since she had been hiding the fact that she was frail, but honestly she did not think she had been very successful in hiding it. As she said, for over a month she had always been tired, unable to keep up with his pace, and she often stumbled. Throughout all of that, Louis never showed any concern. Even when she collapsed, he did not visit or even send a letter. How could he expect her to believe that he cared about her? Louis began to stutter, but Fiona told him directly that this was why she thought it was enough. She added that if he wanted to break off the engagement, she was ready at any time. Louis stared at her as Fiona added that since her family status was lower than his, it would be difficult for them if the breakup came from their side. They might face isolation in the country. So if he did not want to see her anymore, he could send the paperwork and she would finalize everything. Louis told her to wait, but Fiona was done. She told him to leave since she was feeling tired today. Before that, she wanted to tell him one last thing. She was sorry for all the trouble she had caused him until now. Louis turned his back, but what he said next was beyond what Fiona imagined. He said he was wrong too. Fiona was speechless that Louis had apologized for his behavior. When he walked out, Fiona collapsed onto her chair. She never expected things to turn out so differently, nor that she would push things toward breaking off the engagement so quickly. Life truly was unpredictable. With this, she could avoid her villainous trial before its scheduled time. Now she just needed to wait for the annulment papers. Annie came rushing through the door and saw that Fiona was awake. Fiona knew the important thing was that the result turned out the way she wanted, regardless of the method. With that, the life of luxury and happiness under her parents' care that she had dreamed of was just within reach. Meanwhile, Louis wandered into the mansion garden. He came across a few servants gathered in the allotment discussing wild herbs that were good for the body. They mentioned Fiona's name, saying she had told them the herbs aided digestion and relieved headaches. They hoped her health would improve after using them. Louis watched them curiously as his carriage arrived. Once he was in the carriage, he thought about Fiona. Until now, he had seen her as nothing more than an arrogant and selfish fiancé. He had interpreted everything she did as either a bid for attention or a way to avoid trouble, judging it all as lies. But perhaps it was only natural that Fiona wanted to break off the engagement. He thought of the servants and what they said about her health improving. He tapped on the carriage window to get the driver's attention, asking him to stop by his grandmother's estate before heading back. Fiona wandered into her allotment once she was feeling better. Seeing all the fresh herbs made her eyes light up. After just one night since the Porphyry family party she had attended with Louis, and after regaining her strength, she decided to devote herself immediately to growing herbs. Herbs were much easier to grow than vegetables, and as a starting point for home gardening, they suited her perfectly. She planted some oregano, which helped regulate the stomach and intestines and promoted digestion. Basil, often used with pasta in her previous world, enhanced various bodily functions and had a calming effect. In this world, herbs were only used as seasonings, but she believed they should be incorporated into daily life. Fiona imagined strongly highlighting their benefits and distributing them in the markets. If the project succeeded, her family would become even wealthier, and it would be another step toward a peaceful life where she freeloaded off her father's fortune. Since it was decided, she would need to consult her father, and she also needed to request more varieties of herbs. While waiting for the paperwork to dissolve her engagement to Louis, she spent her days in joy and happiness. But then Louis appeared at her house again, and Fiona realized she had overlooked one thing. She thought Louis would simply send the papers, but he had come to meet her in person instead. They both sat down over tea, and Fiona assumed this was the moment to proceed with the annulment. To her shock, Louis said no. She asked him what he meant and why he was here if that was the case. Louis looked down and told Fiona that he wanted to apologize for everything he had done in the past. Fiona said he had already apologized, and Louis agreed, but said there was still something on his mind. Fiona reminded him that for her it was already over. After all, the one most at fault was her, since she had hidden her poor health. She told Louis that all she wanted was for him to annul the engagement, and that would be enough for her. Louis did not seem able to accept that wish. He hesitated before saying there was a problem with annulling the engagement. Fiona asked what he meant. Louis told her it could only be annulled with his grandmother's permission, something Fiona had never considered. She realized she had completely overlooked that problem. In the first place, Louis's grandmother, Lady Irene Hanton, was the one who had decided on their engagement. She was a tough woman who held great influence in elite society. Even Louis's own father could not go against her. She was the absolute authority in the Hampton family. Now that Fiona thought about it, perhaps even if Louis disliked her, he was not eager to annul the engagement because it was his grandmother's decision. Still, Fiona asked if there was any way he could convince her. Louis told her it would be very difficult, as his grandmother was fond of Fiona, and on top of that, the timing was not good. Fiona was confused about why his grandmother was fond of her, and why the timing was bad. When would it be a good time? His grandmother was not an easy person to deal with, but she was certainly intelligent. If Fiona explained her health condition and her relationship with Louis clearly, she would surely understand. So Fiona told Louis that if that was the case, she would go with him to convince his grandmother. Louis looked as though she had suggested something insane, but Fiona was already on her feet, telling him they would go at once. Since they had reached this stage in the annulment process, she would overcome this obstacle too, no matter the cost. They made their way to Louis's grandmother's house and arrived at the large door. Louis reminded Fiona that he only brought her because she insisted, and that as he had said before, the timing was bad. He added that she was not even in a condition to speak. Fiona was perplexed. Not in a condition to speak? Before she could ask, Louis told her they should go in. He entered and apologized for disturbing his grandmother. Fiona looked around and saw Louis's grandmother tucked into bed. She smiled, asking if they had come after all. Fiona was shocked to see her in such a state. Louis told her she did not need to get out of bed. His grandmother said she had moved a little and it tired her out. Fiona asked Louis what was going on. Several months ago, his grandmother's condition had begun to deteriorate until it reached its current state. At first she had difficulty eating and now she was bedridden. When they were alone in the drawing room, Louis explained that this was what he meant about her not being in a condition to speak. Fiona felt deeply guilty. Louis told her it was natural, since his grandmother had asked him not to tell anyone outside the family. He apologized for startling Fiona. Fiona asked if his grandmother had been examined by a doctor. Louis said she had, but the doctor did not know the cause and could not help her. Fiona remembered Louis's past, how he lost his mother at a young age, and how his father buried himself in work afterward. The one who reached out to him and cared for him was his grandmother. That was why she meant so much to him, and seeing her grow weaker must have been unbearably painful. For the doctor to give up on her as well made Fiona feel sorrow for them. This world lacked medical knowledge and awareness, but since Fiona had been obsessed with health in her previous life, perhaps she could figure something out. She was not a doctor and could not cure her, but if there was anything she could do to help, she wanted to try. Fiona asked Louis about his grandmother's eating difficulties, and for more details. Louis said she complained that eating had become difficult, and that she had become picky. She stopped eating solid foods like meat and fruit, and later refused bread as well. Recently, she had been eating only rice brought from foreign lands. Fiona asked if he meant rice. It was unfamiliar in this country and difficult to obtain, but fitting for a duke's family. Louis explained that his grandmother said white rice was soft and easy to eat, and that she ate nothing else. Fiona asked if his grandmother suffered from numbness or pain in her hands and feet. Louis said she complained of numb feet and an inability to walk. Fiona told him to bring her a small hammer-like object. When Louis asked why she needed it, Fiona entered his grandmother's bedroom and explained she needed to check something. She gently tapped the joints with the hammer. Louis looked worried, asking what she was doing. The response gave Fiona her answer. Many illnesses could be suspected in the elderly, such as high blood pressure or strokes, which she could not interfere with. But some conditions could be improved through diet and daily habits. She told Louis that his grandmother's condition could improve. Earlier that day, when Louis came to the mansion, Fiona had been researching distribution routes for selling herbs. She was told that Louis had arrived and wanted to speak with her. Fiona panicked. All that remained was for him to send the annulment papers. He rarely came to the mansion, and now he was speaking with her father. She rushed downstairs and burst into her father's office to find Louis smiling and her father smiling as well. He was calling her charming. Fiona froze, unable to understand Louis's expression. He was praising her as if he were a different person. When they noticed Fiona, Louis excused himself. His face returned to its usual blank expression. He told her he was polite to her parents because they were wonderful people. Fiona was confused about why he would compliment people connected to someone he disliked. Louis explained that Fiona acted polite and calm around his family, which she knew was true. It made sense. That was why her family never expressed concern about her engagement. No matter how strained their relationship was, it was better not to worry their parents. Fiona and Louis looked at each other, then looked away. Fiona thought that none of this mattered since their engagement would soon be annulled. But Louis knew that things might not be that simple. Louis was overjoyed to have a glimmer of hope that his grandmother could get better. For the first time in a long while, the heavy weight pressing on his chest eased slightly. Fiona told him she could not guarantee it, but that recovery was very likely. She explained that the illness was called beriberi. It was caused by a deficiency of the essential nutrient vitamin B1, and its symptoms included fatigue, loss of appetite, weakness, and numbness, all of which his grandmother had been suffering from. As she spoke, Louis felt everything fall into place, yet one question still lingered in his mind. He asked why Fiona had struck his grandmother's foot in the first place. Fiona explained that it was to test her foot's reaction. Normally, when a person's foot was tapped, it would move upward in response. However, his grandmother had shown no reaction at all. That lack of response was clear evidence of nerve impairment. Louis stared at Fiona in disbelief, the realization slowly sinking in. With a trembling voice, he asked what would happen if his grandmother were left untreated. Fiona answered calmly, though her words were serious. If beriberi progressed further, her hands and feet could swell, fluid could accumulate in her chest, and her heart function could weaken. Louis panicked at the thought and asked if that meant she would die. Fiona reassured him that while it was possible if nothing were done, they had identified the cause early. Since it had not progressed too far, his grandmother should recover. As for the cause, Fiona explained that it lay in her diet. She was lacking vitamin B1 because she relied almost entirely on white rice. Fiona told him not to misunderstand. White rice was a good food and contained important nutrients, but its vitamin B1 content was low. Relying on it alone created the problem. She compared it to the Edo period in Japan, when beriberi became widespread due to excessive dependence on white rice. There was no single food that could sustain a person completely. A balanced diet was essential for long-term health. To restore his grandmother's strength, Fiona suggested changing her meals. Bread porridge was rich in vitamin B1 and soft enough to eat comfortably. Brown rice or sprouted rice would also help if available. Spinach, soybeans, and other vegetables could add further nutrition, while lean pork or red meat would provide additional support. Fiona noticed Louis looking overwhelmed, his brows drawn together as he struggled to absorb everything. She asked if he was paying attention. He startled and quickly said yes, asking her to repeat and explain everything in detail so he could prepare properly. Together, they carefully wrote down everything that would be needed. Fiona reassured him that things would be all right and that his grandmother would soon regain her bright smile. Louis nodded in agreement, though fear still lingered in his eyes. He knew he had to be strong if they were going to face this together. Fiona stretched her arms slightly, exhaustion catching up to her. She had never expected Louis's grandmother to be so ill, and the situation had shaken her deeply. As Louis had said earlier, this was not the time to discuss breaking off the engagement. Any such matters would have to wait until his grandmother recovered. Fiona told Louis she would return home and insisted that he stay by his grandmother's side. As she turned to leave, Louis called out to her. He thanked her sincerely for everything she had done that day. Because of Fiona, his grandmother had hope again. He admitted that he never imagined white rice could be the cause of her suffering. Fiona gently told him to stop blaming himself. It was not his fault. White rice was widely considered healthy, and he had acted with nothing but care and devotion. She reminded him that medical knowledge in this world was limited, and that he should focus his energy on helping his grandmother recover rather than dwelling on the past. She added that physical strength and proper nourishment were vital, and that he should help his grandmother live a long, healthy life. Perhaps one day she would even meet her great-grandchildren. Louis almost laughed at that image. When Fiona asked what was wrong, he simply smiled softly and said it was nothing. He walked Fiona to her carriage and she said goodbye awkwardly before stepping inside. Louis remained standing there, watching as the carriage departed, his expression unreadable as ever. In his mind, a memory surfaced. A younger Fiona, dressed in a cute daytime dress with her hair pinned back, stood before a platter of delicate cakes. Louis had asked if she was going to eat since she had been staring at them for so long. Fiona had hesitated before giving in, saying she could not eat much. Choosing which cake to try had been the hardest part. Louis had picked one and told her it was the most delicious. Fiona had taken a bite, paused, and then smiled brightly. He had been right. Just then, Louis noticed someone watching them. It was his grandmother, smiling warmly. She told him that the day was special, the day he would choose his fiancé. When she asked if any young lady had caught his eye, Louis had glanced at Fiona and whispered her name into his grandmother's ear. It was a moment he never imagined he would remember so vividly. As he stood there now, Louis smiled faintly, realizing how much time had passed and how deeply he regretted his past actions. 3 months had passed since Fiona told Louis about the method to treat his grandmother's beriberi. When he walked into her room, she asked him what was going on. Surprised to see him again, she began to reassure him, saying as she had before that there was nothing to worry about, but before she could say another word, Fiona appeared behind him. Fiona smiled warmly, telling his grandmother that she was very happy to see her in such good health. It was true that she had not completely recovered yet, but she was now able to get up and talk. His grandmother smiled and joked that Fiona's meddling was the reason she had missed her chance to die. She told Fiona that thanks to her, her body felt much better, and she expressed her gratitude sincerely. Since then, Louis had followed Fiona's instructions carefully and prepared meals exactly as she had advised. Fiona was genuinely happy to see that his grandmother had regained her strength. Still, Fiona could not help but wonder if it was time to think about achieving her main goal. She called Louis's name and asked when they should tell his grandmother about breaking off the engagement. Louis immediately began to sweat. He looked down and cleared his throat. Fiona waited patiently. Eventually, Louis suggested that they wait a little longer. He did not want his grandmother to become agitated and risk affecting her health again. Fiona knew that was not something worth gambling on. She agreed and suggested postponing it for another month. After all, they had already waited 3 months, so one more month would not hurt. Besides, she had plenty to keep her busy, especially with the herb business she had planned. So it was decided. Breaking off her engagement with Louis would be postponed a little longer. As Fiona walked away, Louis clenched his fists. A few days later, something unexpected happened. It began on an ordinary, peaceful morning. Fiona sat at her desk, smiling as she reviewed the figures from the herb sales. A month earlier, she had introduced her father to the health benefits of herbs, and they had begun selling them. Their land was already well known for livestock farming, and many people owned nearby fields. Because of that, they had no trouble cultivating herbs or gathering workers to grow them. The project had gotten off to an excellent start. What truly contributed to its success was their focus on clearly explaining the health benefits of each herb. They even included simple recipes. Customers were able to understand the benefits before buying, and many people turned out to be interested in healthier lifestyles. They had simply lacked the knowledge. Fiona believed that if things continued this way, people in this world would become far more conscious of their health through herbs. As she sat in her office, she suddenly heard a loud noise. The door burst open and her brother rushed in, completely out of breath. Fiona hurried over and asked why he was so flustered. He told her there was something urgent he needed to discuss and asked her to stay calm and listen carefully. Outside, there was a huge man who wanted to challenge Fiona to a duel. Fiona was stunned. A duel? She asked him to repeat himself, and he did. There was a large man outside who had openly called out Fiona's name and demanded a duel. Fiona knew there had to be some mistake. She did not know any man like that, let alone someone so intimidating. Her brother urged her to come and see for herself. They went to the gates and her brother gestured toward a carriage parked outside. Fiona looked closely and saw a tall man with dark hair. She immediately recognized him as one of the targets from the game in the Heart of Radiance. His name was Nick Orville. Nick belonged to the Crescent Knights and was a candidate to become their next commander. His swordsmanship was widely acknowledged and he was known as the right-hand man of His Highness, the Crown Prince. Seeing him in person was overwhelming, especially given his tall and powerful build. The question was why he was here. Fiona tried to recall whether this was supposed to be their first meeting or if she had done something in the past to draw his attention. She could not remember anything, but she could not simply ignore him either. Fiona told her brother that she would hear him out. Nick was invited inside, and despite his intimidating appearance and talk of a duel, he seemed surprisingly relaxed. Fiona, on the other hand, was as nervous as ever. To make matters worse, her brother disappeared, leaving her alone with Nick. She asked him the reason for his visit. Nick laughed and apologized for coming so suddenly. He introduced himself with a dazzling smile and explained that he had seen an article. He slid the newspaper toward Fiona. That morning's paper had written about their herb sales, describing them as the talk of the town, and crediting their success to the daughter of Marquis Ariel. Fiona had no idea about the article. Nick asked her if that meant she knew more about health and nutrition than anyone else. He also mentioned that she had helped Louis's grandmother recover from her recent illness. Fiona asked how he knew that, and he casually said he had heard it from a friend. According to him, there was even talk among the nobles that if anyone had a health problem, the best person to consult was Lady Fiona. Fiona could hardly believe what she was hearing. Nick then revealed the reason he had come. He wanted to consult her as well. Without hesitation, he asked how he could increase his muscle mass. He dropped to the floor and nearly begged her for advice. Fiona stared at him and asked if he had truly come all this way to talk about his muscles. Nick explained that he had trained on his own for years, but recently he felt he had hit a plateau. His progress had stalled, and he wanted to build arms as thick as tree trunks. Fiona turned bright red. She could not believe Nick had come all this way just to show her his muscles. To make matters worse, she suddenly heard a familiar voice. Someone walked in to find Fiona standing there, with Nick shirtless on the floor in front of her. It was Louis. Louis's jaw dropped to the floor. He looked at Nick and then at Fiona before demanding what on earth was going on. To make matters even worse, Nick still had his hands wrapped around Fiona's. That was enough for Louis to storm over and grab hold of Nick. He told him he knew who he was and demanded to know why he had his hands on another man's fiancé. Nick awkwardly ruffled his hair, telling Louis he had just gotten a little carried away. Fiona then asked Louis what he was doing here, and he said that the Marquis's son Bart Elior had told him that Fiona was in trouble, also known as Fiona's brother. Fiona looked up, certainly pissed. When he said he was coming, did he mean Louis? Louis was not done with Nick yet, asking exactly what he wanted from Fiona. Nick stuttered that none of this was how it looked. He had only come to ask Lady Fiona, a woman very knowledgeable about health, for some advice on how to grow his muscles, and he had taken off his shirt to show her. Louis' death stared Nick, which even made Fiona sweat. He asked him if that really was all. Nick said yes, leaving Fiona confused. Not only about what was happening but also about that strange feeling she had. What had gotten into Louis? To rush straight to the manor and interfere like this just because her brother said she was in trouble. And was Nick really this muscle-enthusiastic character? Fiona tried to recall his route in the story. The heroine was originally a commoner, and she grew tired of noble life. During that time she met the knight Nick, who guided her on the path to become a knight. They worked toward that goal together. In the end, Nick even proposed that she stay. He wanted them to run off together and keep honing their skills. It was almost like a youth sports club. Fiona could not help but facepalm herself. Maybe he really was the muscle-enthusiastic type after all. She was snapped back to reality when Louis asked her what she thought. She told him it was right, but Louis told her not to tell him she was going to entertain the stripper maniac's request. Nick could not believe Louis said that about him. He told him he was not a manic stripper and that it was perfectly normal when talking about physique, but Louis was having none of it. Fiona thought the sound of both of them bickering was buzzing through her head, so she snapped at both of them. She told them she understood so they could both calm down. Nick asked Fiona if she could help him, and Fiona said yes, but she had one request. Muscle building was hard to explain with words alone, so she needed him to wait a little and give her a week. That night, Fiona stayed up late working hard on her writing. In no time, she had something very special prepared. She handed Nick the papers containing basic explanations of muscles with diagrams, along with an explanation of nutrition. She added that there could be some overlap with the Royal Knights training regimen, but it did include an exercise program for each part of the body according to its effect. Louis looked at the papers and told her he could understand them, but an explanation about muscle mass and nutrition, he thought it would be simpler. Fiona could not believe it, after all that hard work. She shouted at Nick, telling him straight that the human body was not a simple design, and as Nick should know, you could not expect muscles to grow in a day or two. She told him that the most important things in building muscle were execution and consistency, not just random workouts but training and diet based on correct knowledge to achieve the best results. Those materials contained everything Nick needed to achieve his goals. Fiona warned him that although it might feel difficult at first, they would be very beneficial to him. She asked him to trust her and read through the materials thoroughly. Nick looked at Fiona, completely speechless. Fiona knew what he was thinking and told him immediately that there was no magical ingredient that would give him muscles instantly, but there were plenty of effective foods that could help. For example, chicken breast meat, beef thigh meat, seafood like sardines, soybeans, and dairy products. They were all foods rich in protein, which was said to build muscle. Especially if consumed within 30 minutes after training, they helped form stronger and bigger muscles, and if eating food was difficult, drinks would do as well. She told him to avoid only eating protein. He should first take in all essential nutrients in a balanced way, and then increase his protein intake. Louis listened in as well as Nick stayed silent. Fiona asked Nick if he was listening, and he told her he understood. Of course it was unfamiliar information for him, but as they say, muscles were not built in a day. He thanked Fiona for enlightening him. He promised to read the materials carefully, and said he was looking forward to gaining the body he dreamed of. He told her he would get started immediately, taking Fiona's hand. That of course made Louis cringe, but he let it go. Nick was on his way in no time. He waved Louis and Fiona goodbye with a huge smile on his face. Fiona waved back, but Louis was still apprehensive. She looked over at him, pleased she had convinced Nick but unsure why Louis was suddenly acting so strange. She called his name and told him that since her brother was the one who had called him, she had caused him trouble. But what mattered most was that they were fine now. But Louis was still silent, and Fiona wondered if it was what she thought it was. Louis then turned to her and asked her directly if Nick was her type. Fiona smirked. What did he even mean by that? She remembered how fired up he got when he first saw her with Nick, so she told him straight that she would not flirt with several men at once, even if she was the villainess in this story. She would never do anything to cause him trouble, so he could rest assured until they broke the engagement off. Louis then seemed to remember the whole reason why he and Fiona had connected again. He looked at her, leaving her wondering what he was thinking. Then he said there was something he wanted to talk about, regarding the engagement. Fiona was anxious over what Louis was going to say next. She listened to him before asking if he meant he wanted to reconsider the timing of telling his grandmother, or something similar, but to her surprise Louis said no, that was not what he meant. When he thought about his past actions, he felt that saying something like this would put her in a difficult position. But in the end, when he saw her talking with Nick, he felt that if he broke off his engagement with her as things were now, he would regret it. Fiona did not know what to make of that, and when Louis asked her for another chance to start over holding onto her shoulders, she was speechless. Why was he saying these things? The fact that he not only did not want to break off the engagement but also wanted another chance. Did this mean he did not hate her? She wondered if the agreement to break off the engagement was for both of their sakes. This was insanely out of character for Louis. He nervously awaited her response before asking if she had someone else she wanted to get engaged to instead of him, but Fiona immediately told him there was no such person. Louis then asked why. Did she have another reason for wanting to rush the breakup of their engagement? Fiona told him truthfully that there was, but how could she explain it? That she had reincarnated from a miserable poor office worker? Of course she could never tell him, so instead she blamed it on the fact that everyone hated her and that she was unsuitable for him. The excuse was not strong enough for Louis, who told her that even if people said they hated her, was it not only because she had been ill and could not socialize well? Fiona knew her excuse was weak, and Louis even offered to crush whoever said that using the influence of the House of Duke Hampton. Fiona then added that her weak body was an issue too. He told her that on top of her frail body from the start, she had also been exhausted from preparing papers for Nick the day before and that he had not shown her enough concern. But Fiona told him that was not the reason. Since then, because of the shock of not being able to break off the engagement, and because of Louis' heart-tiring words and actions, Fiona ended up bedridden for 3 days for the first time in a while. She knew it was possible to get a fever from exhaustion, and having to stay in bed was something that still happened to her, even now. But lately, thanks to improving her diet, building her strength, and starting a routine, she had not been suddenly fainting or staying bedridden for days. She knew what was done was done. She asked Louis why he never came, and he paused to think. The room was filled with gifts, to the point where Fiona could not even move. Louis blurted out that he had selected them very carefully, not that it changed anything. She did not want him to come, despite how much he had changed. There was no doubt she was not imagining things, but was the man in front of her really Louis? She still did not understand why he was suddenly reconsidering breaking off the engagement anyway. Right now there were many things she did not understand, but what was clear was that breaking off her engagement with Louis had returned to square one, and the road ahead of her was filled with obstacles. She could only wonder what she was going to do from now on. At the royal palace, the Crown Prince Jeremy passed Nick in the hallway. He asked him if he had finished his training and what the papers in his hand were. Nick explained that the papers had been given to him by a young lady with great knowledge of health and nutrition, who had recently become a topic of conversation among the nobility. Jeremy looked at the papers and recognized Fiona, the daughter of Marquis Elior. Louis said that if he broke off the engagement he would regret it, and that he wanted another chance. But the question was why? In the first place, Fiona became Louis' fiancé because his grandmother chose and decided on her. So there was no reason for Louis to cling to that matter. She remembered his face lighting up when he saw her. Then she woke up to Annie. She rose, rubbing her sore head, but she had enough strength to wish Annie a good morning. She told her that she had another unpleasant dream. Annie felt Fiona's forehead and told her that their guest had come again today. Fiona sighed. She met with Louis in the conservatory, and he smiled when he saw her. He stroked her hair, asking her if she felt well today. Fiona tried not to shriek. As usual, the distance between them was far too close and Fiona pushed him away. She told him she was fine and told him to stay away from her. Louis looked hurt, but he respected her wishes. He held his hand out instead, telling her, "Here." Fiona wondered what that meant, imagining that he maybe wanted her to sit next to him, so she reluctantly moved forward, only to find herself in his arms. He told her that if she kept standing the whole time it would affect her health. Fiona died inside. She could not believe that Louis was growing softer by the day. Or maybe he was trying to kill her through heart failure. He looked at her seductively, and Fiona had to keep her eyes on the ground, knowing she could not let Louis' behavior sweep her along again today. It had been more than 2 weeks since the postponement of breaking off her engagement. It was true that she had convinced him that enough was enough, so the number of gifts had become a third of what it was. Still, his visits to the palace continued. Honestly, during the first week or so, she still hoped that he would reconsider the postponement and agree to the breakup. But she was completely wrong, as there was no sign whatsoever that Louis would go back to how he used to be. But why did he want to suspend the decision in the first place? Fiona remembered him saying he would regret it, but he never told her why he would regret it. It was certainly odd for him to want to get close to her, and Fiona wondered if he had an ulterior motive. Or could it be that he actually wanted to marry her? The thought seemed impossible. He used to hate Fiona, and she knew that could not be turned around. She still had countless bad memories of him anyway. Fiona knew there was one thing she needed to do. She needed to ask him directly, but when she looked over, Louis had already told her that there was something he wanted to show her. Fiona looked at Louis, wondering what it could be. It turned out that Louis had gone out of his way to ask her gardener about the health-beneficial plants grown in the greenhouse. Fiona gestured to show him where the herbs were, and Louis checked them out curiously. He had never shown any interest in what Fiona was growing before, or perhaps it was natural for a fiancé to try to get to know the other party. Louis told her there was something he would like to give her. He showed her a pot, and Fiona looked closely. It was a pot of rice, along with soy sauce and other rare goods. Fiona shrieked with excitement when she saw them. White rice, soy sauce, vinegar, and even katsuobushi flakes. Louis smiled, explaining that when his grandmother was sick she had looked at white rice as if she envied it. So Louis used to obtain white rice through a special route, but for the rest of the ingredients he did not know how to use them, so he never bought them. But he thought that Fiona might know about ingredients from that country and how to use them, so he ordered them this time. Fiona felt like she was dreaming, looking at the ingredients she had been convinced she would never see again right in front of her. She turned to Louis and thanked him sincerely. He looked back at her, but then she suddenly gasped. She realized she was letting her emotions get ahead of her, and Louis embraced her closely. He told her he was glad she liked them, and let her know that if Fiona needed them he would like to send her these ingredients regularly from now on. Fiona turned away and gave herself a moment. She felt like she had gotten carried away in her excitement and forgotten herself. But she still did not know the reason Louis had postponed breaking off the engagement. These were all rare and luxurious ingredients, and he had suggested sending more when she ran out. It only made her more confused. And would he ask for something in return later? Of course Fiona really wanted them, but would accepting them be too much? She told Louis she was grateful for his thoughtfulness, but she would feel embarrassed for him to go to all that trouble for her. She told him again that as his fiancé she was a bad deal. Of course she respected that he did not mind, but she could not give him anything in return. But Louis told her he did this because he wanted to. He looked at Fiona as if he were trying to work out what she was thinking. He suggested that he send these ingredients regularly, but in exchange he could ask for one thing. Fiona listened. Louis said that he was currently thinking about opening a restaurant focused on healthy food. He said that he would like to serve dishes using these ingredients, but it seemed he would have trouble finding someone who knew how to use them. So he asked Fiona if she would be willing to work with him on preparing the restaurant's menu. So Louis had decided to start a healthy food restaurant, something Fiona did not expect. She asked him if he really had a plan for it, and he said yes. Right now in the kingdom, many people had started caring about their health, and thanks to Fiona's herb selling project, he believed that a restaurant would have great potential. He even suggested opening a branch in the capital and building a customer base. Once the business stabilized, they could expand to other regions. The Hantons had always had an entrepreneurial flair, and Fiona knew it was a brilliant plan. When it came to food in this kingdom, social class made a huge difference. Nobles ate rich, heavy foods, while commoners survived on plain and bland meals. But if everyone could come to know delicious and healthy food through the restaurant, it would definitely change their way of thinking. That would also make the world an easier place for Fiona to live in. On top of that, having these ingredients regularly available would be wonderful as well. So Fiona told Louis she was in. Louis told her he looked forward to working with her. But Fiona hesitated for a moment. She told Louis that if she was going to be involved, there was something she would like to request. Louis was originally going to gift her these ingredients, but she would rather pay for them herself and in exchange receive her share of the profits the restaurant made. Louis told her that was fine, and Fiona grinned. Even though her family already had money, she also needed to think about her own future, which she hoped would be peaceful and secure. She told Louis there was one more thing. She wanted the contract to have a clause limiting their partnership to the period that she and he were engaged. Louis asked her what she meant, and Fiona told him to think about the future. If he were to fall in love with someone else or want to get engaged to another girl, they would not face any issues or disputes because of it. That way it would not become the cause of condemnation even after the engagement was broken. Fiona knew that financial matters often turned into major disputes, and it was important to avoid that. She asked Louis what he thought, but Louis looked completely taken aback. He asked if she was really talking about him falling in love with someone other than her. To Fiona, she did not think there was anything wrong with her words. But then she told Louis there was one more important thing she wanted to mention again. She wanted to know why Louis wanted to continue being engaged to her. Louis went red and struggled to answer. He blurted Fiona's name, telling her that she did not realize his feelings for her. Fiona looked at him, unsure what to make of that. Then Louis told her clearly that he loved her. He vowed that he would never love another woman again or get engaged to anyone other than her. Fiona was stunned to hear his confession, and she was even more stunned by what it meant. She asked him if he truly loved her. Fiona knew that not long ago they were constantly arguing, and she did not remember doing anything sudden that would make Louis fall in love with her. But Louis blamed that on his misunderstanding of her, and said that things were different now. Fiona was not convinced, telling him that nothing happened suddenly. Louis looked down, as if he did not want to go into what he was about to say. He told Fiona that even when he decided to postpone breaking off the engagement, he was only acting out of concern, trying to make her back down on her own without explaining things properly. But now he understood the reason behind those puzzled looks she would give him from time to time. He told her that it seemed he first needed to make Fiona realize why he fell in love with her and how much he loved her now. Fiona was still shocked to hear this, but Louis was certain in his words. He wrapped his arms around Fiona's waist and asked her to go on a date with him. Fiona asked if he really wanted to. Not a mandatory party or formal event, but a real date, taking things back to the past, to when Bart, Fiona's brother, first got into the trouble he did that day. He greeted Lord Luigi with a bright smile. Louis asked him how he was doing. Bart apologized for troubling him recently because of the guest, but Louis told him that he had actually helped him a lot. He asked Bart if he had lost weight, and Bart told him that at Fiona's suggestion they had reviewed their household diet. He explained that even nobles, if they cared about their health, were better off eating fish and lightly flavored foods, not just meat. Louis agreed, saying that when Fiona examined his grandmother, she had told him the same thing. Thanks to her, the acne that had been bothering him had completely disappeared. His mother, who suffered from insomnia, slept well, and his father's snoring problem had also improved. Louis said that it was truly amazing, and Bart smiled. He told Louis how Fiona had a goal to live to be 100, and they were trying to follow her example. Louis had always thought the Elior family was lively by nature, but ever since Fiona started taking these steps for her health, she had become even brighter and more cheerful. His grandmother mentioned how strange it was that things had improved so much since following Fiona's advice. She always thought Fiona's dignified appearance suited the future wife of the Duke's son, but what had happened recently only strengthened that belief. She told Louis that he must maintain a good relationship with Fiona. Louis knew his grandmother was hard to please and did not praise people easily. On top of that, he had not seen her smile like that in a very long time. So when he saw Fiona sitting upright in her chair sipping tea, he could not help but smile. As the days went by, his feelings for her only grew stronger. He knew he would do everything he could to prove his feelings to her. Louis called Fiona's name and she looked more confused than ever. For a brief moment she wondered if something strange was happening to her, especially when she saw the unfamiliar softness in Louis's expression. He was looking at her differently, almost carefully, as if afraid she might vanish if he blinked. But all he said was that she was really cute, words he had never once said to Fiona before. He then added that her dress looked really good on her, his gaze lingering as if he were committing the image to memory. He asked if it was more comfortable than the dresses she usually wore. Fiona agreed without hesitation. She had chosen to wear it because today was the date he had promised her, and because this dress had been carefully arranged by Louis just for her. The nobles in this world lived in a society built upon heavy dresses with stiff shoulders and restrictive designs. These garments suffocated women's bodies and often caused headaches, sore backs, and shallow breathing. Normally, whether at parties or dates, it was considered natural for women to wear heavy gowns, tie their hair up tightly, and balance on high heels for hours at a time. She had been introduced to a designer named Natalie, a woman renowned as the most famous designer in the country. Securing an appointment with her was nearly impossible, yet at Lord Louis's request, Natalie had prepared a dress for Fiona that was as light as possible. It was a custom-made piece designed with comfort as its foundation. Natalie had told her that Lord Louis was deeply worried about her health and wanted to ease her burden, smiling knowingly as she said Fiona was certainly cherished. Remembering those words made Fiona blush, especially when she recalled Louis's confession from the other day. Based on that concern, a one-piece dress without a corset had been made. Light yet elegant, trimmed with delicate lace and paired with flat shoes. Fiona loved it. Compared to the dresses she normally altered herself just to breathe comfortably, this felt like freedom. She found herself hoping that one day this kind of clothing would become common among nobles. Fiona thanked Louis sincerely for the wonderful dress and he looked genuinely relieved that she liked it. As they began walking together, their steps naturally falling into rhythm, Fiona asked about the surprise location of their date. Louis smiled and revealed they were going to the theater. When they arrived, a theater worker greeted them warmly and remarked that thanks to Lord Louis, the venue once again had a large turnout that day. They were guided to their reserved seats, the best in the house, with an unobstructed view of the stage. Louis quietly reminded Fiona to tell him immediately if she felt unwell during the performance, then handed her the program. Fiona thanked him, barely able to contain her excitement. She had never imagined sitting in seats like these. Her father once said that the Hampton family practically ran the country's economy, and seeing this, she felt he had not exaggerated. Still, she could not help but wonder why Louis had chosen this particular place. As she looked down at the program, she noticed the characters' names. It followed the story of Louis and Fiona, who met at the age of 7 during a ball. An odd sense of familiarity settled in her chest. As the play began, the character Louis was instructed to speak honestly when he encountered a girl he liked. When he saw Fiona, a smile appeared on his face that he could not erase from his mind. Soon misunderstandings and conflicts unfolded between them. Fiona watched, drawn into the performance. She found herself quietly rooting for the characters to reconcile, her emotions swelling as the story progressed. At one point when Fiona collapsed, her eyes prickled with tears, and when Louis arrived just in time she felt a wave of relief wash over her. Though there were puzzling elements, the story moved her deeply. When Louis asked her what she thought of the performance, Fiona answered honestly. She told him how emotional it made her feel, how nervous she became during certain scenes, and how happy she was when Louis reached Fiona in time. She admitted that the similarities in names and circumstances felt strange. That was when Louis finally confessed. He had written the play himself, about himself and Fiona. Fiona looked up at him, completely in shock. She asked him if he really wrote it. Then he pointed to the program, which contained his name as the scriptwriter. Fiona grabbed it, and she could not believe it. Louis smiled, asking if he had never told her. On this date he had promised that he would make Fiona understand his feelings. But then Fiona told him that she would never have imagined him going as far as writing a script and having it performed on stage. Louis told her that when he was 7, he went to a ball and fell in love with Fiona's smile at first sight. He even asked his grandmother for her to be his bride. So the characters were based on real life. It was true that later in life they became like enemies, but when Fiona smiled while she was helping his grandmother, he remembered the feelings from that day. Then Fiona asked him if it was true that their engagement was not entirely decided by his grandmother. Louis told her that she had misunderstood. Of course the final say was his grandmother's, but it was not only her. The one who chose her was no one other than him. He looked Fiona in the eyes after taking her hand, telling her that he had always loved her. Fiona felt Louis's hands in hers, and she realized that all this time she had no idea. In the game, nothing was ever mentioned about Louis and Fiona's meeting, nor about his feelings for her before they became constant rivals. Then Fiona wondered if everything he did for her was only to draw her towards him. She remembered the seamstress's words, how adored Fiona was by Louis. They heard a voice asking Fiona if her body was still alright. Fiona said yes, and Louis suggested that they take a short walk around the city before heading back. It was Fiona's first time in the streets of the city, which were large and grand. She spotted cute little stalls and boutiques as Louis told her she must not have gotten to go to the city much because of her condition. But Fiona knew it was more because the only times she ever went out were either to Louis's mansion or to parties she was forced to attend. Going down into the city never happened. She never thought a day like this would really come where she could walk freely. She was glad she worked so hard all this time to improve her health and build strength. Not to mention the dress helped a lot too. Louis looked at Fiona and took her hand. He led her away, telling her they should start from over there and have a look. So he led her through the streets, as Fiona looked into the windows of grocery stores, bakeries, jewelry stores, and parks. Louis even bought Fiona an ice cream, which she gladly accepted. They found a bench and sat together, Louis smiling at Fiona as she tried the ice cream. But Fiona was still feeling unsure about things. She did not know why, but being with him like this now, she remembered what Louis said about their first meeting. She did not remember much from that part, but when she was 7 years old she probably just thought Louis was a cute child. It never crossed her mind that he would one day be her fiancé. She took a breath. Now that she thought about it, she felt even more guilty about everything she did, all because of her frailty and illness back then. On top of that, she even doubted what Louis was doing for her. She wondered if she had been treating Louis badly all along, so she told Louis the truth. Back at the theater, she could not grasp his feelings all that time. She apologized, but Louis told her his past actions also played a part, and she thought their engagement was a decision his grandmother made. But he was pleased that she understood that he loved her. Fiona knew that all this time the only thing she ever thought about was how to break off her engagement with Louis, and now he was telling her this. She did not know what to do anymore. But she thought that if Louis really loved her, then the reason she worked so hard to annul the engagement and the future where she was condemned by Louis, what would become of it? First of all, when Louis realized her frail body, the chance of Fiona being thrown into a freezing cell and dying there really did seem less likely. But as for the condemnation, as long as there was still an engagement bond with Louis, she would still be punished for hurting her. This meant the possibility had not vanished completely. But now, if Louis truly loved her, could he really condemn her without even hearing her out? Of course they could not know how Louis's feelings would change once the heroine appeared, so that did not mean the possibility had completely disappeared. Before she could think anymore, she felt something warm being placed around her shoulders and looked down to see Louis's jacket. Louis told Fiona that today was a warm day, but there was still a breeze. In that moment, Fiona could not help but expect that if it was Louis now, then things would be alright, simply because his feelings towards her reached her strongly enough to blow away all her worries. Fiona thanked Louis for the jacket, and he told her this could be the real beginning because he wanted Fiona to want to marry him. Fiona tried to keep herself composed. She knew she did not really have a choice, even if they set marriage aside for now. If that was how it was, then why did she not start thinking about keeping a good relationship with Louis instead of focusing on breaking off the engagement? After all, escaping condemnation amicably might not be such a bad option. Louis told Fiona that he would never let her run away. From now on, Fiona worried whether her heart could endure these perfect days with him, so all she could ask was for him to be gentle with her. Was all this part of Louis's plan? With this date today, she had finally decided to reconsider her relationship with him. When they arrived home in the carriage, Fiona thanked him for the night and told him she enjoyed herself. Even better, she still had some energy left. Louis told her not to underestimate it as she could wake up exhausted tomorrow, and Fiona laughed, knowing that was true. At any rate, Louis, perhaps because of what happened with his grandmother too, came to really understand the struggles of people with frail bodies. Beyond that, today was a day where she got to learn a lot about him. But it turned out the conversation was not over yet, as Louis had arranged something else. He asked if they could take a bit more time and told Fiona there was someone he wanted to introduce her to. A young boy appeared, and Louis told her his name was Eric Bond. Fiona smiled, asking who he was, and Louis explained that starting from today he would be staying at the Elier household, and he would be her personal doctor. Fiona was extremely confused. This child was a doctor? Before she could ask any more questions, Eric seemed to guess what she was thinking. Louis explained that although Eric was only 12 years old, he had graduated early from one of the top foreign medical colleges in the world, and was a doctor who traveled all over the globe. Fiona asked if that meant he had graduated early, and Eric replied that he was more competent than most doctors in the country. Originally, Louis had consulted him about his grandmother's illness, so he tried to come and help her. But before he could arrive, his grandmother regained her health thanks to Fiona's advice. Fiona asked if it would make more sense for her grandmother's personal physician to be in charge rather than Fiona. Even if she had recovered, she was still advanced in age. Louis told her the truth was that when they discussed continuing their engagement, he told his grandmother about Fiona's condition, and at that moment she was the one who requested that Eric become Fiona's personal doctor. He added that if anything happened to his grandmother, they could call Eric back. Fiona was surprised that it was Louis's grandmother who arranged all of this. She had been hoping to find a doctor eventually who could help her, so she accepted the kind offer and asked Eric to take good care of her. Louis smiled, asking if the matter was finally settled. Eric began examining Fiona, pulling out his briefcase. Fiona sat down as he listened to her heart and lungs. Louis stood nearby, watching protectively, but Eric asked him what he was doing. Louis looked confused, so Eric told him she would need to take off her clothes for the examination and that it was dangerous for him to be there. Louis reminded him that he was her fiancé, so it was natural for him not to mind. Fiona immediately asked Louis what he was talking about, because of course she would mind. Louis said he did not want to leave her alone with another man. Eric reminded him that he was not just another man but a doctor, and that was exactly why they chose a child like him. Louis needed to deal with it. Louis knew Eric was right, but he still thought that if he saw Fiona's skin under the pretense of taking responsibility, he could push the matter toward marriage. Fiona could not stay silent and told him not to pretend that was not the reason he was insisting on staying. She pushed him out the door, warning him that if he did not leave immediately, she would not speak to him for an entire week. Louis left at once, not wanting to upset her. Afterward, Eric remarked that it must be difficult to have such an overprotective fiancé overflowing with love. Fiona smiled, admitting it might be true. After a few moments, Eric finished his examination and told Fiona that there was no serious illness at present. However, she was undoubtedly frail and needed to strengthen her body and build stamina. Fiona agreed, knowing the issue lay in her physical fitness. Eric added that while she had begun taking measures, consistent care since childhood would have left her in much better condition. He also explained that given the level of medical knowledge and technology in the country, it might not have been possible. Before coming, he researched the situation and learned that nobles lived to flaunt luxury without concern for health, while commoners survived on cheap bread alone. Fiona was amazed by his insight and felt it was the first time she had met someone who shared her perspective. She asked about his travels and how medical awareness differed in other countries. Eric said it varied greatly. When she asked about his own country, he only replied that it was advanced in some ways. He closed his briefcase and said things were what they were. He then explained her treatment would begin with medicine to regulate her stomach and intestines, followed by strengthening her body. Eric called for a maid, and Annie appeared. Annie explained she would oversee Fiona's care and health and had already summoned Lord Louis back. She began outlining Fiona's new daily routine. In the morning, Fiona would expose herself to sunlight for 15 minutes to regulate hormones and reset her biological clock. Breakfast would be nutritionally balanced to avoid straining her digestion. Eric asked if Fiona had always managed her health alone and whether imposing a new routine was necessary. He answered himself, saying small neglects always happened, so from now on she would follow it under his supervision. Fiona worried the stress alone might make her sick, but she said she was relying on them. From that day on, Fiona's relationship with Louis began to change, and she also had to reconsider how she approached her health. Lord Elior was later met by Aaron, a messenger from the royal palace, who informed him that a letter had arrived addressed to Lady Fiona. Meanwhile, Fiona rested in her room. At last, the time had come for her to open a new chapter. It was only 2 days after Eric had come to the mansion. He was taken along with Louis and Fiona, despite questioning it. They were heading to the royal palace. Louis asked that if Fiona's condition were to suddenly worsen, what they should do. He knew it would be better for her personal physician to be nearby. But why was Louis of all people here? He sharply said he was Fiona's fiancé, so of course he would accompany her if there was a summons from the royal palace. He knew that she was anxious about going to the palace too. Fiona stuttered that was true, as hard as it was to admit. It all began the day before yesterday when her brother received a letter summoning her to the royal palace. They asked her what she did, wondering why the letter called for her to go to the royal palace at once. Fiona sighed at the thought. She did not remember doing anything that would warrant such an urgent summons, and she was worried. Having Louis by her side gave her some peace of mind at least. But really, what could the royal family want from her? In the game, there was never an event about Fiona being summoned by the royal family, although she guessed that was because the heroine had not appeared yet and it was just a detail that was not mentioned. Louis smiled at Fiona, deep in thought. He reminded her not to worry, reassuring her that no matter what happened, he would take care of it. He smiled, looking into her eyes. Fiona gave in. She told him that she would be relying on him. They approached the palace as Fiona nervously peered outside the window. Fiona and Louis walked in, and just as Fiona imagined, the royal palace really was amazing. Louis turned to her and asked if she wanted a castle. The current palace was only average in size because they did not need a bigger one. He told Fiona if she wanted, he could build one for her any time. Fiona looked at him like he was mad, but it was clear that Louis was serious. How the other half live? Of course she knew that the Duke held power and wealth, second only to the royal family, but she never imagined he had enough fortune to build a castle. Fiona quickly told Louis there was no need for a castle. If she did not say anything, he would definitely start production that week. Of course she knew that money was important, but having that much excess was a little scary. A man approached them, asking Fiona if she was Lady Fiona Elior, daughter of the Marquis. Fiona said yes, turning to see a man with dark hair dressed in smart official clothes. He introduced himself as Aaron, the servant of the Crown Prince. Fiona could not help but gulp. This guy was super cute, but she did not remember him in the game. All she could recall was that in one of the CGs there was someone standing behind the crown prince, so that must have been Aaron. Louis introduced himself as her fiancé, and Eric as her personal physician. Aaron told them that as far as he was aware, only Fiona was invited today. He asked if Eric really was her personal physician. Eric stepped forward, presenting Aaron with his medical license. Aaron bowed, apologizing for the misunderstanding. He told them to follow him. So Fiona, Louis, and Eric followed Aaron through the palace hallways. Fiona expected something like this, but the atmosphere was nothing like a peaceful tea party. They approached a huge grand door, and Fiona wondered if this was the gate. There was an announcement that Lady Fiona and her companions had arrived. The doors suddenly burst open, and Fiona was face to face with an older man with silver hair. The throne room was filled with people who all turned to look at Fiona. Fiona looked down, suddenly realizing where she was. This was the place where Louis strips her of everything and condemns her in the game. All Fiona could remember was Louis shouting, bellowing at her for what she did to that girl. He told her he would expose it here, before everyone. Fiona snapped herself out of the horrible thought. She had to tell herself that this situation was different from the game. It was still too early for the condemnation event, and this time, the ones who summoned her were members of the royal family. On top of that, even Louis' feelings towards her now were different from how they were in the game. So it was fine. She exhaled and introduced herself as Fiona Elior and that she had come in response to His Majesty's letter. Fiona thought about the king, how she greeted him once alongside her parents. But this was her first time speaking with him face to face. She turned to see Aaron, who smiled and waved at her. She soon realized that even in a council like this, he did not look tense at all. The king began by saying that there was something they wished to confirm with Fiona. She looked up curiously, wondering what exactly he meant. A man pulled out a newspaper and announced that he would read what was written. A few days ago, talk spread about a certain herb, and it turned out that the one behind the idea was Lady Fiona, daughter of Marquis Elior. She took advantage of her knowledge of a herb unknown to others, and from that launched this great popularity. It was the newspaper article that covered Fiona's family's herb project. To have this read out before such high-ranking figures was so embarrassing. She waited awkwardly as the king asked if the article was true. Fiona told him it was true, and there was another awkward silence. Eventually the king smiled and told Fiona that there was something he would like to ask of her. A younger man stepped forward, asking Fiona to allow him to explain the rest. Fiona gasped. It was His Highness, the Crown Prince Jeremy Graliel. He was one of the romanceable characters in Among the Glittering Stars. Jeremy's route in the game was the classic story. A heroine from a low-ranking noble house falls in love with him, turning it into a Cinderella tale where the heroine rises. A story that made you want to root for the heroine without hesitation. Prince Jeremy was dazzling, noble, broad-hearted, and his route was her absolute favorite. She had to stop herself from melting right in front of him. In her previous life, Jeremy was her favorite prince. Even though she had always been preoccupied with her illness and the looming shadow of condemnation, for the first time she now felt glad to have been reborn into this world. She had met him once before she regained the memories of her past life, but it was only a few brief greetings at parties. So her impression of him had been vague, but now that she could finally speak with him directly, she was truly happy. Louis noticed Fiona holding Jeremy's gaze for a moment too long, and his face dropped in concern. Jeremy said that now they had confirmed a few things. It seemed that Fiona's subjects as of late had become healthier. Fiona listened, trying her hardest to pull herself together. Jeremy went on to say that this was thanks to her, and they would like to ask her to extend her efforts not only for her own subjects but so that all the people of the kingdom could become healthier. Fiona looked up, shocked at what the prince was asking. Jeremy said that she might already know that the culture of healthcare in their kingdom was still behind the times, and for this reason they were studying a comprehensive reform plan to be led by the state, so practically a national initiative to improve health. Fiona saw herself as nothing but an ordinary noble's daughter, and on top of that, frail and without much stamina, and now she was being asked to take part in this. She needed to think. It was true that she would be grateful if the people of this country became more health conscious, since that would make her own life easier. Jeremy said that the one who strongly recommended her for this role was Nick. Nick placed his hand on his chest before flexing his arms. He said that it was all thanks to Lady Fiona's advice on nutrition and training methods that he was able to build muscles stronger and more efficiently. He told Prince Jeremy that Lady Fiona would surely be a tremendous help. Fiona went red, wishing Nick had kept this information to himself. She knew this was exactly why they said that no good deed goes unpunished. But what should she do now? She wanted to refuse, but the other side was the royal family, and on top of that it seemed that they had already investigated and researched this thoroughly. And now thanks to Nick there was no room left to refuse. Louis placed his hand on Fiona's shoulder, asking her if he could have a minute. Jeremy caught Louis's eye, and it was clear that he was not impressed. He stepped forward, introducing himself as Louis Hanton, Fiona's fiancé. He said that it had been quite some time since they last met, but with regard to Fiona there was something he needed to say. Fiona could only wonder what Louis would say next. He stepped forward and declared that if this conversation was going to take that long, could they at least let Fiona sit down. Fiona saw the royals looking bewildered at Louis's sudden change in tone. Louis told them that Fiona had a frail body and that even just standing like this used up a lot of her energy. He asked them to bring her a seat. Of course he was being very sharp considering he was speaking to the king and crown prince, but Louis was not playing. He said that if they had claimed that they had investigated Fiona, then surely His Highness Prince Jeremy must know that Fiona had already mentioned before in front of his fiancée Lady Camilla her weak constitution. If that was the case, then was ignoring her condition right now, even for a member of the royal family, not a sign of inconsideration? Jeremy looked stung, and Fiona looked like she wanted to die. But Jeremy agreed that Louis was right. He admitted he did not think about that and asked Aaron to bring Fiona a chair. Fiona sat down feeling relieved but still confused as to what was happening. Had there ever been anyone who sat on a chair before the king in the throne room? Jeremy smiled, telling them they should continue the discussion. While Fiona could not stop thinking about how hard it would be for her to reject Louis after everything he had done for her, going along with the flow like this was not the right thing to do, so she intervened. She thanked the prince for showing concern for her health, and as Louis said, she was really weak. But as for participating in the project that was mentioned earlier, she sincerely apologized. She saw it as beyond her ability. Her body was weak, but more importantly, her knowledge about health was just a hobby and not reliable enough to be depended on. Jeremy told Fiona that even if she called it just a hobby, there was no one in this country who had as much knowledge as she did. As for her body, that was another matter. But regarding her knowledge of health, he knew she gained this knowledge from books. In other countries, healthcare was more advanced compared to this country, and that was why she was suitable for this role. As for her body, it was enough for her to participate only as much as she wanted. All they hoped for was that she would share some of her wisdom about how to make people healthier. Fiona looked at the prince, a million thoughts rushing through her mind. She said that in truth she once thought that if they could provide an environment where people could gain various kinds of knowledge, it might contribute to raising their overall health awareness. Jeremy asked her what she meant, and Fiona knew she had slipped up. She had to think fast, telling him that knowledge about nutrients that can be obtained from food is usually learned by nobles from private tutors or in schools. But for nobles who could not afford tutors and of course commoners, if there were schools where they could learn, things would be much better. Louis smiled, telling Fiona he had learned that in some other countries there were schools specifically for common people. Fiona said it was true, and having schools would allow commoners to learn reading, writing, and more, which would in turn widen their job opportunities and raise the strength of the nation as a whole. Fiona hoped the royals understood, but she could imagine how costly these ideas would be if they were implemented. In this country, the gap between nobles and commoners was vast. There were huge differences in living standards. Even in the game, the heroine herself was bullied by nobles because of her humble origins. If there were huge differences in living standards, and on top of that the mindset of class discrimination was deeply rooted, would the state really invest so much money and effort for the sake of the common people? Jeremy was silent, appearing deep in thought. He turned to Eric, asking him if he was Eric Bond of the Revian Empire. Eric said yes, but how did Jeremy know about Eric? He told him he knew the excellence of the subjects of the Revian Empire, and he recalled that in that empire there were also schools. Eric said that there was a system that allowed all citizens to learn reading, writing, and arithmetic. The king said that was an excellent proposal, and in that case they would be establishing a school. Fiona could not believe it, and the others gasped and chattered at the announcement. Jeremy smiled, telling Fiona this was just as he expected from her. He held his hand out, telling her that for the success of this project he would be relying on her from now on. But before Fiona could take his hand, Louis protectively grabbed hold of her. He told Jeremy not to go too far. Jeremy laughed, asking Louis what he was talking about. Louis snarled that Fiona was his fiancée and he would not allow him to get any closer to her. Collaboration on the health project, and then Louis's hostile glare towards Prince Jeremy. How did things end up this way? Before the date with Louis, Fiona was busy in the garden picking herbs. Suddenly, Nick came to mind. Come to think of it, that was the first time she had met one of the capture targets other than Louis. She was surprised that he turned out to be the muscular type, but actually seeing him in person left quite the impression. Since she met Nick, did that mean she would eventually get to see her favorite character too? She thought of Jeremy, someone she had already met once when she was Fiona. But that was before she regained her previous memories. Not that she would do anything if she met him. She just wanted to see him as he really was. He must be so handsome. Suddenly, Louis appeared out of nowhere, snapping Fiona out of her daydream. He looked at her, sensing her shock at seeing him. He asked her who had come to mind, if not him. Fiona began to sweat. Was he suspecting that she was cheating on him? Louis changed the subject, picking a leaf out of Fiona's hair. He sternly told her that he would make sure she focused only on him during their date. He smiled, telling her to wait for the promised day. Fiona wanted to cry out loud. Jeremy called for the meeting to begin once everyone had gathered in the office. It was time to discuss the school management project. He said that he would first introduce the main members assigned to the project. He put his hand out to Fiona, telling everyone they probably already knew her as the originator of the idea. Fiona smiled and told everyone it was nice to meet them, though it was clear how nervous she was. Jeremy then introduced Louis Hanton as the Duke's son and her fiancé who would be supporting her. He introduced Eric as the doctor in charge, and Nick Orville as the representative of the Royal Guard. Moving on, he introduced the Chancellor's son and acting deputy, Sadius Belanti, as well as the assistants Aaron, Robin, and Rick. Jeremy himself was the overall person in charge. This time, based on Miss Fiona's opinions, the Royal Palace had summarized the framework for running the project. Fiona still could not believe it. Could it be that she had become involved in a national project like this? In the end, after thinking in her own way about whether she should cooperate or not, she agreed on 2 conditions. Only 2 hours of work per day and financial compensation. No matter how she tried to refuse, it was obvious she could not escape from this, so in a way this path was her only option. Therefore, the matter of participating in the project itself was no longer a problem for her. But it was impossible to ignore that the core members of the team were Lewis, Jeremy, Nick, and even Sadius. They were all the romanceable characters from the game in the Glitter of Stars. If she thought about it carefully, she was the villainous lady whom Lewis would condemn in front of their very eyes. This situation was way too hard on her heart. She knew that no matter the cost, she should not have agreed to this project. Since all the romanceable characters in the original story were high-ranking individuals, with a large-scale project like this, it was not strange for them to gather here. Jeremy turned to Fiona, asking her if there were any points in the management plan summary that caught her attention. Fiona, caught off guard, began to mumble. She knew she needed to pull herself together. Just because she was near the romanceable characters right now did not mean there was any immediate danger to her. All she had to do was perform her duties. So she said that the fundamental policies of the project were sound, but regarding management, before they began to open several schools at once, she suggested they do a trial by opening a pilot school at the start. Jeremy seemed surprised at her idea, but Fiona explained that from the point of view of citizens who did not know anything about the concept of school, it could look like a waste of taxpayers' money. Moreover, unexpected problems might arise at the opening. To deal with them without confusion, it might be best to start small. Fiona said she wanted citizens to be able to study in schools where they felt as safe and as comfortable as possible. The others murmured. Fiona's words were not something they expected. Fiona caught Sadius's eyes. He said that he did not expect to hear words that cared about citizens from someone nicknamed the Flower of Pride. Fiona smiled, realizing it was the first time she had heard that nickname. She said that when she decided to join this project, she remembered something. She used to be physically weak and rarely went outside. She could remember the first time she went into town with Lewis. There were many shops and a variety of people in the city, and it was so enjoyable. And then she had an idea. If those wonderful people who worked and made things supporting a beautiful town like this could live healthily and have longer lives, she wanted to do what she could for that. Jeremy smiled, telling Fiona he felt the same way. Fiona looked quite starstruck in that moment, and Louis even noticed. Sadius seemed as stern as ever, and Fiona felt like she was in trouble. Jeremy said that the remaining tasks concerned educational materials. For the health and nutrition parts, he wanted Fiona to take charge. Fiona agreed, wondering if they meant middle and high school level. They also proposed for Louis to work with Fiona, with Eric as the assistant. Eric asked Jeremy if he was referring to him. And Jeremy said of course, since Eric was the brilliant doctor from the Revian Empire who had graduated early. Eric eventually accepted the plan on the condition that it did not interfere with his duties as Fiona's personal doctor. Fiona knew that having Eric on board reassured her after all. Nick stood up, saying that for physical education and sword arts he would take the job, making every citizen muscular without exception. The next topic was general education, a job which Sadius took on. Jeremy asked Sadius if he would really be okay with the workload, and Sadius agreed. The diligent prodigy, the leading candidate for the next chancellor, but difficult to deal with and inclined not to trust others. In the game he was one of the romanceable characters who did not open his heart easily. Sadius declared that he would make the educational materials better than those Fiona would prepare. A statement that caught Fiona off guard. A few days after the school administration meeting, Fiona was summoned by Camilla Porphyri. They met under a canopy over tea. Camilla was the primary candidate to be engaged to Prince Jeremy and also the villainess in Jeremy's route. The invitation card said she wanted to confirm something, and Fiona imagined it was about Jeremy. She told Camilla that it was only to help with one of the state's projects, and besides, Sir Nick, Sir Sadius, and others were always with them. Camilla asked if that meant they were never completely alone, and Fiona reassured her that was the case. There was no doubt Camilla was misunderstanding and thought she was setting her sights on Prince Jeremy. Her fiancé Louis and the doctor in charge of her were always by her side, so Lady Camilla had nothing to worry about. Camilla looked down and sighed. She said that a friend of hers had seen Fiona talking with Prince Jeremy in a friendly and close manner, so she just wanted to make sure. Fiona wondered if she was referring to the friend who was part of that clingy group. Of course she had almost gotten herself into trouble. After Sadius, she nearly made Camilla her enemy too. As for Sadius, she still did not quite understand him. But even so, originally she had no right to pry into Prince Jeremy's relationship with Camilla. Camilla said that in any case, His Highness and she were not engaged, so whether he ended up in a love relationship with Fiona or not had nothing to do with her. Fiona told her that was impossible. Standing up, Camilla said that she felt it at their family's previous party. Lady Fiona's impression had changed quite a lot. Fiona could only hope the change was for the better. In the end, Camilla said that if the reason Fiona was meeting Prince Jeremy was work-related, she had one request she would like to ask of her. She slid a handkerchief to Fiona, embroidered with a falcon. She asked her to deliver it to His Highness Prince Jeremy for her. Fiona was shocked that Camilla asked this of her. But Camilla explained that he had been very busy lately because of the work the two of them were doing together. She was afraid he might get tired or that his health could be harmed, so she made him the handkerchief as a protective charm, and if she asked His Highness to give her a moment of his time, it would be a bother. So that was why she wanted Fiona to deliver it on her behalf. Fiona thought to herself that Camilla could request a meeting and be granted one even if he was busy. She was from one of the high ducal families of this country. Fiona remembered Camilla in the game too, but in the end she now regretted her rash actions and could only lament them. She would accept any punishment someone gave her, and she prayed that the two would be happy forever. Fiona knew she had a merciful heart, willing to accept her guilt and step back for Prince Jeremy's happiness. So Fiona smiled and told Camilla she would deliver it. Camilla smiled and thanked Fiona for her help, and Fiona told her it was her honor. Camilla said she would like to keep a good relationship with her from now on, and only asked that she did not fall into a passing fancy. Camilla could indeed be intimidating. From now on, Fiona knew she must make sure never to be alone with Prince Jeremy. She made her way back home, and today she could feel her body growing heavy faster than usual. When she got back, Eric seemed to be arguing with Nick, telling him that push-up practice was not something just anyone could do. Louis said that if he were him, he would feign illness every time in his class, Eric agreeing. They welcomed Fiona back, asking her to check the material they prepared. Fiona forced a smile, but she admitted that every meeting with people had been a lot for her, so she relaxed a bit when she found their calm conversation. They all looked at her, surprised that Fiona saw this as a calm discussion. Louis ruffled her hair before looking into her eyes. He pulled away in concern, telling her she had a fever. The others gathered around, and Nick held a thermometer, confirming Louis was right. Fiona told them a slight fever was normal for her, but Louis said she should rest today, while he and Eric would critique Nick's work in her place. Fiona knew she could not argue with them, and to make matters worse, Louis picked her up, telling her he would take her to bed now. Fiona asked him to wait, but Louis made his way with her in his arms. He asked her if she was okay, and if she had been at Camilla's mansion today. He asked her if something happened there that made her so tense. Fiona told him it was not a big deal at all, and that Camilla just wanted to know about her relationship with Prince Jeremy, since Camilla had misunderstood what was happening. Louis looked at Fiona, which made her even more stressed. He sat her on the bed and looked deeply into her eyes. Fiona gulped as Louis asked her if she liked Prince Jeremy. Louis looked down, telling Fiona it was impossible. Fiona could not let Louis misunderstand her too. It was true that she liked Prince Jeremy as an Oshi, but certainly not romantically. For her, Jeremy was not someone she wanted as a lover, but rather someone whose love story with the heroine she supported. But how could she explain that to Louis? She looked down and told him to listen. Louis looked up as Fiona began to speak, but then he suddenly let go of her hand, apologizing. He told her that this was not a proper conversation to have while she was sick with a fever. He got up and said that he would take his leave for now. Fiona called out to Louis, but he was gone. Her maid came over and took her hand, telling her it was hot from the fever. But all Fiona could think about was what Louis had said to her. She went to bed but could not sleep. She had never seen that expression on Louis's face before. He really looked pained. At their next meeting, she could only hope that she could explain properly about Prince Jeremy. But since the mild fever did not go down easily, she did not get the chance to talk again with Louis about Prince Jeremy. Today was the day of the school inspection, and the group arrived at the new school. Jeremy explained that some of the playground equipment was behind schedule. It seemed the craftsman did not quite capture the complicated design. Fiona said she would prepare papers with diagrams as well. Louis looked around the school, seeming unfazed. Fiona was relieved. Since it was Louis, she had been a little worried he would do something to Prince Jeremy, but it seemed like she was overthinking it. But then Louis held his hand out, telling Jeremy that after this he had a meeting at the royal palace and that he should hurry up and disappear from Fiona's sight. Fiona thought that maybe she had not been overthinking after all. Jeremy told Louis that he did not need to tell him about his own meeting, and asked why he was talking like it concerned him anyway. Today he was supposed to attend the meeting as the heir of the Hampton family as well. Louis said no to that and that he would be absent. Jeremy coldly added that would be impossible, as the meeting gathered the great nobles of the kingdom. An heir of a duchy like him could not miss it. Louis told Jeremy that Fiona was more important than the meeting, but Fiona jumped in, telling him it was super important for him to go since this was also about the Hampton family's reputation, so Louis was practically dragged away by Eric. Fiona sighed once he was gone. She asked Jeremy to wait. Jeremy turned around and asked her what it was, as Fiona handed him an object wrapped in paper. Fiona said that this was something Lady Camilla had handed to her the other day. She said it was a charm because Jeremy had been so busy lately. Jeremy looked down and asked Fiona to thank Camilla on his behalf. He smiled and said goodbye to Fiona. Fiona did not know whether that was appropriate or whether he was annoyed. She had no right to interfere in Prince Jeremy's relationship with Lady Camilla, of course, but she hoped that Lady Camilla's feelings would reach him even a little. So was this enough? Sadius came over, telling Fiona that from now on he would lead the tour instead of Prince Jeremy. Fiona suddenly realized that since both Louis and Jeremy had left, only 3 people were able to do the inspection: Sadius, Eric, and her. Fiona smiled, telling Sadius that she was honored to assist him, but Sadius did not smile back. When Sadius was younger, his father had held him to extremely high standards, asking him why he could not solve all the questions perfectly. Sadius would plead with his father to listen, but his father was stern in his words, saying he had prepared the correct environment for studying and calling his son the unlucky one. He told him to leave the country immediately and go to the palace in Kyle, a cold and harsh land. Sadius was told he would not be able to see his mother either, so it was no surprise that he was the man he was today. He turned to Eric and Fiona, asking them to follow him. Yesterday was the garden inspection. Today it was the classrooms, the chemistry lab, the home economics room, and other special rooms. They were supposed to check all of these facilities, but Fiona hurried after Sadius, who walked quickly ahead of her. He showed no mercy even when climbing the stairs. Since she announced her frailty and illness, everyone had adjusted their pace and matched hers. It had been a long time since Fiona felt this way. She looked up at Sadius, panting, as he showed her the hall. Leaving no time for her to recover, he told her they should make their way to the next room. Fiona chuckled, telling Sadius that if they kept this pace she would most definitely fall. She looked down, apologizing but telling Sadius her body could no longer keep up. She asked him if they could rest there for a bit. Eric mentioned that there was something else he was curious about, as Fiona wondered if the pace was supposed to be set to suit her weak body in the first place. She wondered if it did not reach Sadius. Eric stepped forward, asking Sadius if he had not noticed Miss Fiona's expression while she was in pain the whole time. He pointed to Sadius's glasses, questioning if he really saw with them. Fiona was surprised that Eric was being so direct on her behalf. Of course, she had lost her temper with Louis in the past, so this time she tried to hold herself together. Eric went on to say that Sadius's pace alone dominated, with no regard for anyone else. And when Fiona and he agreed to participate in this project, His Majesty had emphasized that they needed to accommodate her body. Eric asked Sadius if he had forgotten that, as Sadius looked at him. He eventually said he was aware of it, and Fiona's eyes widened. Eric began to shout, asking him why. But then Sadius said that he did not trust Fiona, and he was not convinced in the first place by her agreeing to cooperate on this project, to be evaluated because she used knowledge she gained from foreign books. He said that just because she was in an environment that let her read those books, was that not just luck? That was not an assessment of her true strength. He said that if he had been the one to read those books, he could have done the same. Therefore, he would not accept her participation in the state project. And if she was sick and weak and could not work, then it was better that she withdrew now. Fiona was shocked by Sadius's harsh words, but then Eric accused him of being jealous. He ruffled his hair and said that whether he liked it or not, that was his business alone. But there was no justification for forcing a sick, weak person to exceed their limits. Eric told Sadius that Fiona's participation was at the direct request of His Highness the Royal Prince. No matter how much he tried to obstruct her or push her to withdraw, that would only diminish his own value. Fiona called out to Eric, but he put his hand on her arm. He continued to tell Sadius that as Fiona said, they would take a break now. He dragged her away. Sadius looked down, saying he understood that, but he could not accept people who gained recognition without any effort. When Eric and Fiona found a bench, they took a seat. Eric was furious, telling Fiona the day was super exhausting. Fiona laughed, telling him he was right. After the previous meeting, Louis had warned Eric about Sadius, calling him someone to be careful of. He understood why now. Fiona was shocked that Louis said that, but Eric told her that she should have fought back. Fiona smiled, telling Eric he did that job for her. And if Fiona in the game had been there, she would have exploded with anger in that situation. His words were sharp, and she remembered that Sadius was originally an ordinary child. But his genius father would not accept that. But the words she heard before they left reminded her of Sadius in the game. To force him to devote himself to study, he locked him up in the cold, snowy Kyle region, and there for 10 years Sadius worked himself to exhaustion until he finally won his father's recognition. But as a result of that experience, he lost trust in people. Fiona knew that from Sadius's point of view, she might simply seem like a hateful woman who gained recognition through cheating or underhanded means. At least now she understood why Sadius hated her, and today it was best that they finished the inspection tour quickly without further angering him. She got up, telling Eric she was fine now and that they should continue. Eric agreed and decided to go and look for Sadius himself. When he left, Fiona thought to herself how trustworthy Eric was. He saved her a little while ago and defended her. She knew she could rely on him. Not to mention he also played a major role in their school project. When they decided to set up a first aid room to treat injuries at school, he took the initiative and designed it. They did not have much chance to talk beyond her health, but they still became closer than they were at their first meeting. Fiona wanted to ask Eric more about himself next time, but then her eyes widened when something approached her. It was a super cute kitty. Fiona scooped her up, surprised that a cat lived there. In her past and present life she never had time to keep pets, but she always wanted to have a cat someday. But suddenly the cat ran away, finding another person to cuddle up to. That person was none other than Sadius. Fiona wished that Eric was there too. She looked at Sadius, who played with the cat, overwhelmed by embarrassment, so she eventually said that the cat seemed quite attached to Sadius. Sadius looked up, telling her he fed it a lot when he came there. Fiona told him that seeing a stray cat showing its belly like that was very unusual. But suddenly, the cat flopped over, seemingly in pain. Sadius panicked, asking Fiona what was wrong with him. Fiona rushed over, telling Sadius they needed a vet, but then she wondered if there was such a thing in this world. She looked around, knowing Eric could help. She rushed off, assuring Sadius she would definitely save the cat. Fiona ran as quickly as she could, finding Eric. She pleaded with him to help, despite him warning her that cats were not his specialty. He urged Fiona to rest as she collapsed to the ground, exhausted. Sadius saw Fiona panting, seeming stricken. Eric laid the cat on the table, diagnosing the issue, which turned out to be nothing more than a hairball. Sadius and Fiona looked confused. Eric explained that when cats lick themselves they swallow hair, and since they cannot digest it they vomit it up as a hairball. He reassured them that he had checked the cat and it was perfectly healthy. Sadius and Fiona exhaled a big sigh of relief, but Fiona apologized to him for rushing and causing a fuss for nothing. Sadius told her he was sorry too. He looked over and asked her if she also got flustered by a mistake. When Fiona looked at him hoping for more context, he told her it was nothing, apologizing to Eric for the commotion. But then Eric asked them why exactly they were apologizing. There was nothing to apologize for. This time it turned out to be nothing, but that was just the result they found after helping the cat. He reminded them that when they felt something was wrong they should not hesitate to speak to a specialist. Being overconfident that something was fine and leaving it alone was worse. Eric said that his father used to say that to prevent any emergency one should never hesitate to consult a doctor. Fiona wondered who his father was, and Eric explained that his father was also a doctor and that most of what he knew was from him. Fiona smiled, asking Eric if his father was still in the Revian Empire. Eric said yes before asking if they were planning to let the cat live there even after the school opened. They discussed how there might be people who came to the school who were afraid of or did not like cats. Sadius mentioned that it would be better to find someone to adopt it. But as for him, his mother sneezed and her eyes got irritated if a cat came near. He was also looking for someone to adopt the cat. Fiona stepped in, telling Sadius that in that case would he like her to adopt the cat. Sadius looked at Fiona, who went on to say that she understood if he might be worried about entrusting her with raising it. So if he had any conditions, she would comply with them. For example, if he wanted to check in regularly, it was her first time raising a cat, but she would definitely take care of it. She asked him what he thought, and Sadius remained silent. He looked at Fiona, who bowed down, anxiously waiting for his response. Sadius told her that he still had not accepted that her getting approval was just luck, and he had not started to trust her yet. But the memories of Fiona flashed in his mind, and how caring and compassionate she was today. He told her that after reviewing her actions once more, he thought it might be okay to observe how she was as a person for a while afterward. Fiona looked at Sadius, knowing what that meant, but Sadius said he would check on the cat regularly if that was acceptable to Fiona. He thanked her and bowed, leaving Eric and Fiona smiling. Back at the house, Sadius asked if White Mask number 1 was alright. Fiona smiled with the cat in her arms. She told him that the cat's name was Ruby and that Ruby was a female. Nick was also at the house, having come to ask Fiona about a new training program. Louis was stunned to find the two men at home, and Eric explained that Sadius was only there to check on the cat. He caught Louis' eye, who asked him if he had really come just to check on the cat. Sadius bluntly asked him if that was obvious. Fiona scolded Louis for being rude, apologizing to Sadius. She smiled warmly, as Sadius looked as awkward as ever. Ruby ate the catnip, and Fiona laughed. They were all in the monitoring phase. Louis, Nick, and after Camilla, it seemed Sadius's relationship would also improve. At least it seemed so. Although Louis annoyed her a little, Fiona still managed today to get along nicely with Sadius and Nick, and that made her happy. Louis told her that he had some tea from a certain country that was said to be good for your health. He suggested that they head back and drink it together. Fiona said yes with a smile. She recalled the memories of her previous life. More than half a year had passed, and yet Louis had shown no sign of meeting the heroine. They were supposed to meet at the church, and Fiona imagined living peacefully like this forever. But Jeremy looked so tired. Fiona picked up on it as Sadius explained that they had just successfully launched the first classes at the new school. They had also received great approval from the citizens, but it seemed that the school had become the cause of additional requests from the people. Jeremy shouted that it was no use and they could not do it alone. Fiona had a seriously bad feeling. Jeremy pleaded for Fiona to lend them her strength, just as she expected. She said it was impossible, and Jeremy asked her to at least hear the details before refusing. Fiona said she already knew it would be extremely burdensome as always. It was true that the school project made the people happy and it was worth the effort. She enjoyed it too, but it was extremely hard work just to open the first school. The amount of curriculum was enormous, and the inspection left her bedridden. Although she cooperated within the agreed limits, it was super overwhelming. On top of that, they also had to establish other schools in different regions. Jeremy said that after the citizens saw the facilities of the first school and the content of its lessons, requests started pouring in. Among them was that they inspect the state of the hospitals and orphanages. Jeremy explained that he went out with Aaron and others to visit some of these institutions, and their conditions were terrible. Fiona looked down, thinking to herself, with the level of health awareness in this country, it was no surprise that voices like this were rising. Louis asked Fiona what she thought about reconsidering the terms of their cooperation. He turned to Jeremy, telling him that when they said they needed Fiona's help, it was not the same as before. They now had the curriculum prepared by her that could be used even without her direct involvement. He proposed that her cooperation regarding new schools and the review of other institutions be limited only to matters outside the scope of those curricula. Fiona looked up and Jeremy admitted what Louis was saying was reasonable. That way they could also ease the burden on Fiona. He asked Fiona what she thought and she agreed too, but he had a request about the hospitals and orphanages, for her to see them herself and then they could think about what they could do. He pleaded with her and Fiona looked at Louis. For the prince of this country to ask her like this, she could never refuse. First to the orphanage with Sadius as a guide. Fiona looked up to see a church. She thought they were viewing an orphanage. Sadius explained that the orphanages there were mostly attached to churches. He asked if that was a problem and Fiona said it was nothing. Even if it was a church, it was not necessarily that church. Even when she went to the throne hall, the palace where her condemnation happened in her previous life, nothing occurred. But why did she feel a tightness in her chest? There was a disturbing feeling pressing on her. Louis looked at Fiona, asking her if she was cold. Fiona told him she was fine, and Louis's eyes widened. The pastor came, asking them if they were believers. Sadius said no, they came on the prince's orders to inspect the orphanage. He asked the pastor if he could let them see the children's conditions. A girl stepped out from behind the pastor, asking him if they had guests. Fiona looked at the girl in pure disbelief. Her brown curly hair tied up. It was her. Louis had finally met her. Her name was Alice Wells, and she was the heroine of this world. Alice introduced herself, and Fiona was stunned. She eventually came to her senses, introducing herself as Fiona Elior, daughter of Marquis Elior. Louis introduced himself as the son of the Duchy of Hampton. This was a little different from the game, but was this not the event where Alice met Louis? In the game, Louis met Alice inside the church after she ran away from Fiona, who was chasing him. She remembered that Louis said at first glance he thought she was a sweet girl, but it seemed her inner self was kind and pure as well. It was love at first sight, and Fiona was in the middle of that scene now. Alice explained that she had only just become a noble recently, so if she made any mistakes in etiquette, they should forgive her. She bowed and Fiona realized just how cute she was. Not only was she cute in looks, but her movements and her expressions too. She was unbelievably cute. No wonder Louis fell for her at first sight. Since that was the case, it looked like Fiona would be nothing but an obstacle from now on. So it was probably best if she distanced herself a little from Louis. She turned to Eric, telling him they should go and check the orphanage. The pastor guided them. Fiona looked around, noticing how run down the orphanage was. They walked into a room filled with children. They gathered excitedly at the sight of visitors, asking the pastor who they were and calling Fiona pretty. The pastor told the children to settle down, but Fiona told him it was fine. She smiled, seeing a child who was with Alice and another beside her. They looked healthy, but the smell lingered. Fiona asked the pastor how often he changed the children's clothes. The pastor said that they changed them once a month. They changed them when they bathed. Fiona asked if he was also talking about underwear, and the pastor said yes. Fiona suggested that ideally it should be done daily, but of course it was hard with the lack of manpower and money. They did not have enough spare clothes to buy. It did seem like there were very few supplies overall, and what they had was insufficient. And she did not see any adults besides them and the father. Fiona asked that when he said there was a lack of funding, did he rely solely on donations to cover operating expenses? The pastor said yes, and Fiona could see why most orphanages were attached to churches. In a country with such wide disparities, the only organization capable of running an orphanage was the church, which received donations from believers. She said that she would request the state to provide financial support, as well as manpower. Fiona added that from the beginning she had received instructions from the prince that any facility being run properly would be given all possible assistance. The pastor explained that they had been doing everything they could just to make sure the children did not go hungry. Fiona smiled, telling the pastor he had done well enduring until now. And if they use this support to bring basic health knowledge into the orphanage, things should definitely improve. She smiled, not noticing Alice watching her curiously. They moved on to the next place and Fiona caught Louis glancing at Alice. It seemed like he had managed to get quite close to her. Alice rushed toward Fiona, who was surprised to find her calling out to her. Alice explained that she used to come there occasionally to help, but she always felt powerless and apologetic. But she said that this time, thanks to Lady Fiona and the state's support, it seemed the environment would finally improve. She was deeply moved by this but asked Fiona that since she was going to another place, that meant there were other places suffering from situations similar to this orphanage. Fiona said yes, looking down in regret. But suddenly, Alice took hold of her hand and pleaded with Fiona to take her along. She said that even if she went, she might not be able to do much. And yet she wanted to see with her own eyes how everyone lived and what they truly suffered from. She looked genuinely earnest, and Fiona could not believe what she was asking. The group visited a hospital next, with Alice by their side. The places His Highness Prince Jeremy requested to inspect were the orphanage and the hospital. So the next question was what needed improving here. Alice turned to Fiona, excited and enthusiastic. But Fiona did not think Alice would come along as well. She said that she wanted to see for herself the environment people lived in and what they were suffering from. Truly just as expected of the heroine of this world. Fiona hoped that this visit would pass without incident too. They were questioned about why they came so suddenly, bursting in and asking to inspect the hospital. The man said that this was a hospital for the common people and not a place suited for nobles of the royal court. He asked them to leave. Alice turned to Fiona, telling her it seemed that this doctor was not very welcoming. She questioned if there was something they were not supposed to see. Fiona sighed and said, "Who knows? But if there was something like that, then all the more reason they should see it." She turned to Louis, asking him if he could handle this matter. Louis said he understood. So Fiona stepped forward, telling the doctor they were sorry. They were aware that this was a hospital for the common people, and yet they had come. They would conduct the inspection in their own way, so there was no need to worry. She turned her back and suddenly the doctor stopped her. Louis put his hands on the doctor before he could make another move. What Fiona saw was unlike anything she expected. Sick people were sprawled out in a dark, dingy hall. Eric said that he asked the patients and they said the bedding was changed once every 6 months. There was no proper cleaning or ventilation either, and it seemed the very concept of hygiene was completely absent. Fiona looked down at the pot of food and Alice even tried some. She reported that it did not taste great. Fiona tried some and could tell it was a mix of soft and hard foods, making it difficult to eat. The menu was always the same and the portions never changed. That was why everyone had no appetite and was thin. A doctor asked what the problem was. All the patients were commoners, and he claimed the nobles could not judge them by their standards. The deeply rooted class consciousness among the staff was a truly serious problem. It seemed like the gap was not only between nobles and commoners but also between the healthy and the sick. Fiona said that the place was filthy and the food was barely edible, so illnesses would only worsen in these conditions. She said that when you looked at the patients' lives and the large amount of leftover food, did you never once wonder whether this environment could ever restore their health? Another doctor mentioned how this was how they had worked for a very long time, and Fiona asked the first doctor what he thought since he had not been very welcoming when they first arrived. The doctor stuttered, saying that he just thought that if nobles were to see the lives of commoners, especially life in a hospital, they might feel uncomfortable. Fiona looked down, stunned by his words. So everyone as medical professionals was aware of how poor the conditions were, yet the situation was left as it was. Fiona said she understood where the doctor was coming from, and that changing deeply rooted ways of thinking took courage. Doing things differently from what you were used to would certainly require effort. But even so, the desire to change this situation was the will of His Majesty the King himself. Fiona said that even so, even if he was told that, he would not be convinced unless he experienced for himself why a change was necessary. She smiled, telling them they should all try living through the patient's experience. She guided the doctors to the hall, asking them to lie down. She then fed them the food, challenging them to finish the entire meal. Fiona asked if they understood now, even a little, the feelings of the patients who were slowly wasting away. The doctors looked stricken, despite only placing themselves in the patient's shoes for a few moments. Louis eventually returned, telling Fiona that he arranged for their company to supply the hospital with new sheets and other necessities. Fiona thanked him. She said that as for replacing the staff, it seemed that Lord Sadius would take the matter to the royal palace so a decision could be made there. She added that she had also given them guidance regarding the menu and hoped the patients would recover quickly. After seeing the orphanage and the hospital, she now understood well what Prince Jeremy meant. They inspected several facilities and their conditions were dreadful. It was a truly grueling task. Alice saw Louis and Fiona together and rushed over, thanking them both for their hard work. Fiona smiled, telling Alice well done, especially for being put in such a difficult position. Alice said no, she was glad she came. Lady Fiona was amazing, especially when she made the staff experience the patient's environment themselves. Fiona smiled. She was initially worried that the idea would make her seem like a villainess, but it seemed things turned out fine. Louis told Fiona that it seemed the cleaning workers she called for the hospital had arrived. He said they could leave the rest to Sadius and head out. He asked her if she felt alright, and Alice asked him what he meant. Louis explained that Fiona had a weak constitution, so she could not keep moving her body for long periods. After all, they did visit 2 places today. The distance from there to the palace was long, and honestly Fiona would have preferred to rest a bit before setting out. Alice said if that was the case, then how about she rest at her house? Fiona and Louis looked at Alice, who explained that hers was not far from there. If Fiona were to sleep for just an hour, she might regain some strength for the journey. Louis smiled, telling Fiona that since the opportunity presented itself, they should accept the offer. Alice promised she would prepare anything with pleasure. They arrived at Alice's home, and Alice suggested that she and Eric would go on a walk in the garden. Fiona could feel free to use the spare room. So Fiona sat back on the bed, and despite being exhausted, the idea of her, the villainess, sleeping in the heroine's house was a thought that kept her wide awake.